We are turning to outcome 3, disability and carers. Just before we get underway, just to remind the committee that we are running an hour and 45 minutes behind at this point. So if I could encourage senators to consider their questions, what can go on notice and what needs to be asked in the room, so we can work through this program, as we've got a number of senators waiting right up until the last item. But we will kick off. Minister Farrell, you weren't offered an opportunity to make an opening statement in the earlier section. Did you have an opening statement here?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to make an opening statement, but at this stage I don't wish to make one. Thank you.
Thank you. Well noted, Senator Farrell. I was due to go to Senator Steele-John in the first instance, but in his absence I'll return the call to the opposition.
Thank you. We don't have anything in this outcome, do you? 3? Yep. No. So will I'll just ask a few questions until Senator Steele-John arrives and then pass the call to him. Yeah.
I was
planning to put mine on notice to save us time, so thank you.
We'll try and get him ASAP.
Yep, perfect. My questions relate to some election commitments and updates in relation to those. In May 2022, the Labor opposition committed to working with supported employment organisations following advocacy from stakeholders and the support employment sector. Can the department provide an update as to the status of this election commitment?
Senator Robin Shannon, Deputy Secretary, Disability and Carers. The government has implemented a range of measures relevant to the supported employment sector. These follow a process of working with stakeholders within the supported employment sector, peak bodies and advocacy groups, representative groups, to devise a set of supported employment principles which have really guided the government's thinking in terms of a range of reforms. Probably most recently and significantly, the government announced in the 2023-24 budget an investment of $52.7 million over 4 years to assist the supported employment sector to evolve and offer a wider range of employment opportunities to people with disability. That's primarily being given effect through a structural adjustment fund, which is a multi-stage grant round seeking proposals from people in the sector, organisations, to really look at how they can foster more opportunities for people with disability to have opportunities to work in open employment and to receive, opportunities that really reflect a broader range of employment experiences. So that's a significant commitment. That measure also includes some employment expos, again to expose people with disability and particularly their families to information about a broader range of employment opportunities. And the government also, as part of that measure, introduced a new program called the Disability Employment Advocacy and Information Program, which is designed to provide information about employment conditions so that workers in the supported employment sector actually have information about their rights and information about the opportunities in the sector. So they're 3 of the key ways in which the government is progressing its commitments in relation to the supported employment sector.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kovacic. Senator Steele-John.
Lovely. Thanks, Chair. All right. So to kick us off, and hello again. Good evening. Hope dinner went well. I just want to ask some questions of clarification of the department. Firstly, starting around some evidence we heard from the Quality and Safeguards Commission earlier in the day. So they were kind enough to share with us that they are undertaking a consultation in relation to the future of registration, of a couple of other key areas for the government and for the Commission, and that consultation paper and process will begin from tomorrow and will last until March 2025. I've also got here a media release from Minister Shorten's office dated the 28th of October, where it's a transcript of an interview actually, where the Minister expresses the view that today we launched a new consultation about the legislation which I hope could be passed by the Parliament as early as the first session next year. Now, the calendar for next year in that first session period, we have between I think it's the 4th and the 13th of September, roughly, in terms of available sitting. But whichever way you cut it, February does come before March. So I want to seek some clarity in terms of what you are being asked to do as a department in terms of preparing the exposure draft, which you articulated earlier is your purview as the department.
So, Senator, I'm not sure that I have a lot more to add to the answer I gave earlier. We are working to an autumn sitting introduction of the bill.
So is that February?
I think the beginning of the autumn sittings is February, but I understand that the reform roadmap suggests that consultation activity will continue into March, and that may well include on the exposure draft.
Okay, but then you would have the exposure draft and the Commission's consultation running simultaneously.
So we would work with the Commission to consolidate the consultation. I mean, the way that we run consultation in similar processes is to take a range of different opportunities. So they could be a discussion paper or some information to advise people of what we think the content of the bill might look like and to seek their feedback on that. But it could also involve targeted consultation with specific stakeholders. It could include some co-design discussions. So it's possible to kind of run these things in parallel, and they're all shaping the final thinking around both the drafting instructions and then the drafting of the bill and the finalisation of the bill. Obviously, the government sort of signs off on the bill at a policy level at the point at which they then agree to release the exposure draft.
But the first, yes, I understand, but in terms of the legislative creation process and your role with it, as I believe you previously informed the committee, the first stage for the department is when the government kind of provides either to you or feedback on information created by your department in the form of a draft, and then that works its way through a process that then can end in an exposure draft in the Parliament. So are you saying that at this time you haven't been given any draft instructions by the Minister's office?
So just as a point of clarification, when I'm talking about drafting instructions, I'm talking about, in effect, the policy advice that we would provide to the drafters of the legislation. So in this case, the Office of Parliamentary Counsel. We will obviously, as an ordinary matter, of course, clarify, we will provide advice to government on the policy settings for the bill, and the Minister will respond and we will get his agreement to the approach, and then that would be shaped through the consultation process as well. Okay.
Are you able to give us any indication as to the length of time that the exposure draft of the legislation will be tabled in the Parliament for consultation?
I think
the feedback period for the exposure draft.
Senator, I think at this point it's too early for us to be able to quantify that. As I said earlier, we will be trying to make that as long a period as possible so that we can provide stakeholders with the maximum opportunity to provide that.
Okay, I understand that. There is a concern in the community about this precise question because of the absence of an exposure draft period in relation to the NDIS legislation. Has the Minister given you an indication, or his office given you an indication of their desired period for the exposure draft of this legislation?
No, not at this stage, Senator.
Not at this stage, okay. Thank you for that clarification. I think there's a kind of pretty reasonably held community expectation that there would be a period to give feedback on the actual legislation as opposed to consultation on the broad concepts being covered by the Commission. They are two distinct things. All right, I'll go now to the question of foundational supports, which is of deep interest to the community. It's my understanding that DSS is leading the development process for foundational supports with the states and territories. Is that correct?
Senator, not quite. The process for developing foundational supports is actually being led by First Minister's departments, but disability officials, including DSS at the Commonwealth level, are working to provide input to that process. But it's a process that's being led through First Ministers.
So from a Commonwealth perspective, Senator, PM&C are leading.
PM&C are leading
the
from
process,
your,
but we are feeding into.
You're feeding into the process
along with the NDIA
and the NDIA and the Commission as well. I actually think okay. And in terms of your department's understanding of the intention of foundational support as of this moment, what is your understanding of what they are intended to what they're intended to be, but also what they are intended to, the purpose they are intended to serve?
Senator Luke Mansfield, Group Manager, Disability Reform and Royal Commission. Senator, the intention of foundational supports, as envisaged by the independent review of the NDIS, was to provide additional supports that go between the role of the NDIS in providing supports to people with significant and permanent disability and mainstream services, noting that many, as you know, Senator, there's more than 5.5 million people with disability in Australia. As we heard earlier, there's 660,000 in the NDIS, and that leaves a very significant number of people not in the NDIS. Many of those have supports that go beyond what mainstream services may be able to support, and that's where foundational supports can play a role. The NDIS review envisaged that there would be broadly two types of supports, one focused on information and capacity building of people with disability and their families and the community, and the other is more targeted supports that are intended to provide additional assistance for people that require that assistance, with a focus on those that have the greatest level of need.
And thank you for that. It's good to just check that that hasn't shifted since the last time we gathered together. That's broadly similar to what has previously been articulated. It's still the intention that, although you have mentioned, of course, the broad number of people that are now currently disabled people and are not accessing the NDIS, there's also a hope that, from the government's perspective, participants that are currently NDIS participants may transition to utilise foundational supports. Is that still partly the goal we're working towards?
Well, general supports are, the intention is that they're available to everyone aged under 65.
Yes. The secondary.
And targeted supports are those outside the NDIS that may need additional support. Of course, if there is a foundational support system that is available to certain groups of people, then there is potential that certain families that, if foundational supports never existed into the future, would continue on a pathway to the NDIS. There's certainly potential that certain people may be able to be effectively supported to have their needs met without without the need to enter the NDIS.
Okay, and also that those currently utilising the NDIS who may in the future be determined to be no longer meeting the access requirements of the scheme would seek, theoretically, foundational supports to provide them with their support needs.
They could well benefit from foundational supports, of course, depending on their individual circumstances.
Okay, so that's, again, broadly what has previously been articulated. In that context, I would like to know a bit more about the process by which the department feeds in to this PM&C-led, PM&C coordinated Commonwealth feed in to a process that you've described as being led by state and territory ministers' offices. How often does DSS kind of come together to collectively provide that input into the process?
So perhaps if I just very briefly step out the sort of different pieces of governance architecture, Senator, and then I'll answer your question. So work is progressing with Commonwealth, between Commonwealth and states, and First Deputies Group and First Secretaries Group. So that's the deputies of the Prime Minister's Department and Premier's departments around the country. They're leading the work, as the Secretary and Deputy Secretary Shannon mentioned. There's a interjurisdictional project management office that's co-chaired between New South Wales Cabinet Office and Prime Minister and Cabinet. And then underneath that, there's been work between Commonwealth and state and territory disability officials, and at times has also involved health and education officials to look at different aspects of the design and, of course, sit in on and the consultations that the Department of Social Services has led. So in terms of the frequency of meeting, there's been different frequencies of meetings over the course since December last year. There's been, standing meetings at the first secretaries level, first deputies level, and also between disability officials. In the case of disability officials, there's been meetings more recently every several times a week, but in the past, fortnightly or monthly.
Okay, and how long have those groups existed for? I counted, there's 2 or 3
effectively,
groups you identified there.
Effectively, these groups have existed all year.
Since the beginning of, since the start of 24?
Yes, so First Secretaries Group and First Deputies Group are ongoing standing groups. They cover a whole range of issues beyond this, but have also covered this.
Yes.
In the case of disability officials, we also have standing governance arrangements. There are arrangements at the deputy level, and there's also arrangements at the group manager level, my level, and those meetings have been happening all throughout the year.
Okay.
Senator, I also chair a monthly meeting with state and territory disability secretaries,
right,
which is broader than foundational supports, but the aim of that meeting is to try and unblock things that might be getting jammed up.
Yeah, thank you. And look, it's a bit dry that I'm asking these questions, I'm sure, but the administrative structures of these things are key to understanding actually how things are being done. Would you be able to table for us or take on notice and provide just a bit of an organisational chart of how those groups fit together? That'd be great. So since the beginning of this year, those 2 groups plus the officials group plus the group that you chair have been meeting to kind of work these things through. Just going to the deputies part, which is the kind of primary Commonwealth part. You mentioned obviously PMC leads that process, but you're involved, the agency's involved, the Commission. Anybody else represented on that deputies group? Any other departments?
Health and education.
Yeah, the Department of Health and Education attend as required. As required,
okay. And in terms of what you're required to bring to those meetings, so is each department required to bring proposals? Are proposals sought? Functionally, how does that many people getting into a room? You obviously have to do some pre-thought. So what does that functionally look like? So
there's been a series of things commissioned by First Deputies Group. Some work to explore different aspects of what foundational supports could potentially be. As part of that work, there was a commissioning of some, if you like, sprint groups to look at children and families and potential supports for children and families, to look at general supports, to look at data-related issues, so better understanding the system. And those groups operated over a period of around about 8 weeks. And their role was really to understand and explore some of the issues. There were lots of officials from Commonwealth and state involved in those groups, included health and education and disability officials. And those groups provided input into papers that were led by Prime Minister and Cabinet.
And Senator, I think it's probably important to recognise that given the kind of joint nature of the NDIS and of the development of foundational supports, some of these papers were actually initiated and authored by state officials.
Yes.
Some were initiated and authored by Commonwealth officials, but they were all shared on a without prejudice basis to advance our thinking so that we can start to reach consensus on some of those key issues.
Thank you. And just forgive my potential ignorance of some of this public service language, but when we talk about the deputies group commissioned sprint groups, what are we? That's all right. Just what are we actually saying then?
Effectively, just working groups that are operating very frequently, very frequently over a short period of time.
Group, then. Good. Okay. So when did the deputies group commission those papers? Have you got a date for that?
I think it's probably fair to say that they've been sort of commissioned on a rolling basis. It's probably a couple of key points.
So the ones that I particularly mentioned were effectively commissioned and operated across March to May.
March to May. This year?
This year.
Yep.
And that was initial exploratory work. And then since that time, there have been other things that have been explored by First Deputies, and as Deputy Secretary Shannon mentioned, states, for example, have explored issues around navigation
and others.
And the Commonwealth has provided some papers in relation to children.
Okay. So, and in terms of, so your deputies group set up a couple of working groups, basically, to go away and work on certain issues, and those groups created papers, basically, exploring different issues.
Or advice.
Or advice.
Yep.
So how many working groups, how many sprint groups were set up?
There was one on data, one on children, and one on psychosocial supports.
Psychosocial supports. And how many papers or pieces of advice, or how many sprint group results?
I'll take the specifics on notice, Senator, just so I make sure I'm accurate around that.
Yeah, okay, cool. And in terms of the department, your feed-in process to what the deputies group then commissioned sprint groups to do, do you bring a proposal to the deputies group and say, this is what we think we need to look into, and then that's a conversation between the other people represented in the room? Or how does that functionally work? Because I'm sure everyone's got an idea about what we need to look into.
I think some of these questions are probably better directed to Prime Minister and Cabinet in terms of the deliberation process. As Secretary mentioned, our role has really been to provide information to those groups, and then there is consideration activities that happen between first departments. Okay,
so DSS doesn't actually actively, and I'm not seeking to go into the deliberations within the thing, just procedurally. DSS does not bring ideas to that group. DSS is there to answer questions from others.
No, we're still trying to shape and influence.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just trying to understand.
No.
Yeah,
And I think
okay.
one of the areas where we have, I guess, particular knowledge is in relation to our networks with disability representative organisations and our understanding of the broader disability policy environment. So as disability officials, we, as the Secretary said, very much want to influence the thinking.
Yes.
And we do work quite closely with our colleagues in PM&C.
And if you could give us just a schedule since it existed, or these groups have obviously existed since January, but if you could provide us with the date since January that these groups met on between then and now, that would be wonderful, and any planned dates in the future that are determined, that would be great. Has DSS submitted to these to the deputies group or to any of the other groups that we've mentioned as part of its desire to shape and influence, a suggestion around utilising the primary health network structure to enable the delivery of foundational supports?
I think we'll have to take that on notice, Senator.
Okay, because I want to confirm, because I've been advised that you have, but I don't want to. I just want to get it clear whether that structure has been.
We will need to take it on notice. We certainly recognise that, particularly for families, often families with children with developmental delay or concern, that often that's their, if you like, touch point with a system of services already.
Yes.
So one of the things that we're trying to do is look at where families naturally go to get advice and information and services and supports. So certainly we're aware of the importance, of the role of primary health networks and other service systems, including early childhood education systems and schools. But whether we've specifically proposed that is something I'm not personally across, and Mr Mansfield's indicated we can take that on notice.
Okay, thank you. Has the question of yes, please do take that on notice. And if you have made that recommendation or provided a piece of advice to that nature, it'd be great to know what that advice was, as much as we possibly can. Have you done any other work to explore? And I don't want to verbal you at all, Ms. Shannon, but it sounds like, and I'm grateful for this, somebody is thinking about the mechanism by which whatever we decide a foundational support is, it will be actually delivered to people. So has there been more work being done within the department or within these groups to identify what a delivery structure would be for foundational support?
Senator, there's been quite a lot of engagement between particularly disability officials about different aspects of supports that might be most helpful in the context of foundational supports, around various different ways that those supports could be delivered. Ms Shannon mentioned, primary health networks. There's also been a lot of discussion about the connection to child and maternal and family health systems, early child education and care systems, for example, and how supports that exist today in those service systems could potentially be built on or connect with other services that are delivered through foundational supports. So certainly those kinds of discussions have happened.
Okay.
And you would have seen potentially in the consultation papers that they set out a range of different types of supports.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I've seen those. But just to confirm, so primary health networks as their delivery mechanisms have been discussed?
Child and maternal health systems have certainly been discussed. And connection with ECEC, early childhood education and care, and connections with school systems.
Yep. Okay. Now, look, dry line of questioning, and you might wonder why I've taken so long to get there, but the reason that I have is not only to understand the process and the way in which communication and consultation is occurring, but as a Western Australian senator, I'm quite familiar with the primary health network structure for our state, and just for the benefit of committee members and anybody else that's watching, like that big green blob is all one primary health network in WA. There's 32 in the country, there's 3 in WA. If you live anywhere there, that's all one network. Those two little discoloured dots are Perth South and Perth North, and that's it. So in terms of the individualisation of any foundational support that may arrive in Western Australia with the intention of being provided to somebody who is currently experiencing an individualised support via the NDIS, I can very much see why people would be concerned to hear that their PHN network might be being considered as a delivery mechanism.
Senator, I can say that I can't recall any substantive discussion about using primary health networks as a primary delivery platform for foundational support. So I can't recall. I took it on notice because I just want to double check.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, the primary discussion between the Commonwealth and states and territories has been about, consistent with National Cabinet decision on 6th of December, to build off existing service systems and particularly looking at child maternal health, ECEC. And so
We certainly haven't locked into a single delivery point. As a matter of fact, we anticipate that we will need to explore a range of delivery points. So I think that's the other thing to emphasise.
I think it's fair to say, Senator, that our West Australian jurisdictional colleagues probably share your view.
I imagine that they do. Yes, indeed. Moving swiftly on.
Can I just check in with you?
Yes. That was the longer one. The others will be much quicker. That was just.
Thank you.
Thank you. And please do provide all that structured information on notice. I'm genuinely, oddly curious about these kind of things, and it will help in the future. Now, acknowledging that this is a complex project, do we have and can you provide an expected timeline for when foundational supports, particularly those foundational supports that are intended to replace supports currently provided under the NDIS, will become available to impacted participants in each state?
So obviously at this point in time, Senator, we're in the middle of a consultation process. There's been 40 events already and another 25 to go. They're running through until early December. Obviously that will help inform all governments about decisions around foundational supports, and really it's probably a question best directed to Prime Minister and Cabinet as the lead. Obviously, it has to be all governments coming together to agree on what foundational supports will be, and it's best to direct any question around timing to them.
But the consultation period is from your part that's playing in it. So basically, the focus of the group of deputies, states deputies, policy officers, in terms of focus on this issue, you expect to conclude in December?
That's the plan at this stage. Of course, we would expect that there would be further consultation or co-design activities that would occur, subsequent to decisions of governments as part of implementation.
There's quite a lot of anxiety to get a clearer answer to that question from people who are currently having supports removed from their plans, and when they query why they've been removed or what they might then do, are being told by agency representatives that the things that they've lost will be provided as foundational supports, and yet we cannot actually identify what they are. So, that is a question, I suppose, for the agency, but that's what motivates me to ask those questions. Now, in terms of safeguards in this process, what work has DSS contributed to the conversations within these groups around what safeguarding looks like within the foundational support context? And I know that obviously the Quality and Safeguards Commission is part of these processes, but also there are, I'm sure, unique insights into what enables federally consistent reporting processes and standardisations of approvals that your department would also bring to that conversation.
Certainly, Senator. And there's been ongoing discussions between the Commonwealth and states and territories about the importance of quality and safeguarding arrangements for foundational supports. No decisions have been taken at this point in relation to how foundational supports will be delivered, or, for example, what level of government will deliver those supports. And as you would appreciate, in terms of making any decisions around quality and safeguarding arrangements, that there's a big connection point between, the nature of the service, the type of service and who it's being delivered to or delivered to the benefit of, and which level of government is delivering it, if indeed it's just one level, or multiple levels of government delivering different types of supports. So it's an ongoing conversation. Absolutely, there's a strong interest of all governments in making sure that the quality and safeguarding arrangements are right, but no decisions have been taken around that at this point.
And can you just take on notice for me, in the interest of time, among the different Commonwealth representatives that are part of these different groups, which department is responsible for, or there could be more than one, for the work around ensuring national consistency of foundational support, and processes for when there may be a thin market of a foundational support, or a crisis point within a foundational support system, to the failure of a provider, or that, the kind of things that we've had to spend 10 years working the kinks out of in the national system.
Yes.
That would be very good to know. My final questioning, and it's just a couple of questions, relates to the NDIS. You will take that on notice, won't you?
Yes, we will.
Scribbling that down.
In August, we had the passage of the NDIS, getting the NDIS back on track bill, which then set out a process of the Commonwealth Government identifying transitional supports as part of a transitional supports list. Been a lot of commentary on this. Can we just get clearly what were the criteria used to decide what would go on that list? That then went for consultation. So just before we go any further, I just want to clarify the government engaged in a consultation process of what should be or not be on that list, and there were a bunch of suggestions included on the consultation form itself. So the first thing I want to identify is the criteria used for what ended up on the discussion paper that then framed the conversation.
Senator, at a high level, I would just say that the lists reflected largely agency operational practice and guidance, existing agency operational practice and guidance in terms of appropriate supports. But I think this is actually a question that's best answered jointly by the department and the agency, because we would both have input to the response.
Okay, so you'd like to give a response on notice?
Yes, if that's okay. Yeah, because we worked very closely with the agency on it.
Please do, and if you could take on notice at the same time, because it probably is the same thing.
Yep.
My assumption is that DSS was responsible for much of the resultant policy development, such as the definition of transitional NDIS support post the consultation. So once you had the feedback, my assumption was that your department led the process of translating the consultation feedback into the transitional list. However, if that's not true, you can give us a joint response.
So again, we worked jointly to refine the lists following the consultation, but DSS, as the policy agency, instructed OPC in the drafting of the legislative instrument.
Yes, okay. Well, that's fine. That's excellent. We just need the criteria used for kind of what did or didn't make it onto the list based on the feedback that was given. Because I'm very aware of the government's rationale for what eventually did or didn't get on the list. But in terms of taking the information from the consultation process and then feeding it into what appeared, that's what I would like to to primarily no. I've got a couple of other questions, but I'll place them on notice. Even I can tell when I'm testing the patience of my colleagues. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Senator Steele-John. Can I just have verbal confirmation from the committee that we are in a position to let Outcome 3 officials go? Great. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair. Earlier I indicated to Senator Reynolds that the topic she was interested in was in Outcome 1. It's actually in Outcome 2, just in case she's listening.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll now call DSS representatives from Outcome 4 Housing. Just give a quick moment to come to the table. Make up 18 minutes, so hopefully we can keep at that pace or faster. Okay, I'm going to go to opposition then. You. Yeah. So senators, will just to assist with keeping the flow, given we've got multiple senators, I'll be going back to 10-minute blocks, and I'll give you a nudge. But I'll pass the call to the opposition first. I believe that's Senator Little. Senator Little, you have the floor.
Thank you. My questions relate to the Safe Places Emergency Accommodation Program. If I could have the officials for that, that's you. Yeah. Thank you. Do the applications for Safe Places Program not require a bed or a room?
Sorry, Senator, could you just repeat that?
So do applications for the program, the Safe Places Program, not require a bed or a room?
I don't think that's the case, Senator. Sorry, Matt Flavel, Deputy Secretary.
So they do require a bed or a room?
Well, they're required. I may get one of my staff to come and assist me with the specific details, but my recollection is, yes, it is required.
Right.
Because the concept of the way that the safe places are counted is often on the basis of the number of bedrooms available. So there's, for Safe Places, the original Safe Places program, there's 40 projects, but the actual number of safe places provided is around 620, I think, and that reflects the fact you've got different safe places of different configurations of bedrooms and other facilities.
Right, okay. If that's different, you'll let us know?
Yes. Yep.
So the target of 531 places was not met by the 30th of June. It says due to capital works delays. Can you give more information on why the emergency beds for escaping violence weren't delivered as intended?
Senator, I think it largely reflects broader issues in the construction market that are obviously well known and well documented in relation to housing generally, that particularly in the wake of COVID, issues around getting an appropriate workforce, around getting approvals and other things did lead to some delays for some projects. It did impact in different ways. So some of the safe places are for refits of existing, and generally speaking, those have been able to be established much quicker. Where safe places are completely new builds, that they're often subject to some of those issues around increased cost, needing to get reapprovals, meeting changing council planning requirements and those sorts of things.
So when you mention refits of existing, are you saying some of these safe places were already safe places?
No,
they just had
sorry.
Rebuilt?
Sorry, they weren't existing safe places, but they might have been a facility that was capable of being a safe place but needed security or other things. Of course, a requirement of a safe place is there's also FDV, family and domestic violence related services provided. So it may well have been that there's a building there, but in order to be a safe place, there's obviously got to be an appropriate capital structure with a whole range of other requirements met, including that wraparound service as well.
Given the consultation process with 145 organisations was completed in 2023 and factored in the feedback from them in that process, have you got any feedback from them about the fact that those the target wasn't delivered in the end as intended, regardless of the result? Have they raised this issue with you?
So obviously as part of the grant process, we have regular dialogue with all of the project proponents. I don't think it's easy to say that there's one single factor that was at play. There have been some circumstances where local councils have put additional requirements on those safe places before they're able to operate, and in some cases that's added additional time. But I don't think you can sort of categorically say there's something in particular that was a unique bit of feedback, other than the fact that, like lots of people who are building, found that in the post-COVID period, construction costs had gone up. That's just a matter of fact, both for safe places and for houses and dwellings generally. And that was challenging because often these are community groups relying on that grant, and so then in some cases that's required them to go back and rescope those works in order to be able to deliver.
But of course, given the announcement, you'd agree that there would have been expectations that clearly weren't met if you come out and actually given a target.
Well, the target will ultimately be met, just not in the time frame, and I think that's the important thing, is that what we've seen is 30 of the original 40 are now operating. We anticipate that another 3 projects will be ready to operate before the end of calendar year, so that's by 31 December this year, and then the remaining 7 from Safe Places 1, as it's known, the first Safe Places program, will come online in 2025. As you would know, there was a second round of Safe Places, so the Safe Places inclusion round that was announced last year, and we've already seen 1 project under that, in fact, begin operating, and that'll, I think many of the lessons learnt from that first round in terms of how to manage some of those cost escalations, properly scoping, were, I think, very much taken into account by some of those community groups who also bid in the second round of Safe Places inclusion round projects.
Right. So of that 100 million for the first round, was that all allocated and spent?
So for the first round it was actually 72.6 million, and that's all been allocated, and the second round, which was announced by Minister Rishworth on the 9th of July, is committing $100 million.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. My questions relate to the National Agreement on Social Housing and Homelessness. Could you let me know, how does the newly announced, is it NASH, I think, in the budget papers, differ from the existing National Housing and Homelessness Agreement in terms of its objective structure and funding mechanisms?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. There's probably 3 things I'd specifically mention. So I think, as the name suggests, unlike the NAHA, as it was known, this is an agreement very much focused on social housing and homelessness. The previous agreement essentially said that it was about affordable housing, but there weren't any real mechanisms within the agreement itself to promote affordable housing. In terms of the financial allocations, perhaps the most significant is a requirement under the NASH for states and territories to collectively spend at least $400 million each year in match funding. So the Commonwealth 400 million from the states and territories on homelessness services. That's a pretty significant commitment. So that's a minimum of $800 million between each year between the two between the state and territory and Commonwealth governments. So over a 5-year agreement is really a $4 billion commitment. Under the NAHA, that commitment was only $127 million a year. So it's a quite significant shift in the focus on committing to homelessness services, which is particularly important at this juncture. And then the third feature is, I think, the introduction of an outcomes framework. The Productivity Commission reviewed the NAHA, and one of the things they found is that it had no real link to outcomes. To give the former Minister for Housing her due, Julie Collins, in numerous meetings with state and territory colleagues, she was quite upfront in negotiating an agreement and saying she really wanted to have clarity over what was actually being delivered. And so the outcomes framework, that'll be things like how many social houses there are, what homelessness services have been provided, to what extent people are being diverted away from homeless, will all be part of a new outcomes framework that'll be measured, with the intention of providing accountability for the funds put into that Commonwealth State Agreement.
Thank you. And would those 3 elements encompass what you would consider to be the specific improvements or changes that weren't addressed or under the NAHA?
Yeah, I think the other thing is that the Productivity Commission said that having too many priority groups can be an issue because it sort of blurs the focus. There is a specific section in the NASH in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing needs, And in fact, for homelessness services, they are identified as the sole priority group. So I think there's been a number of different shifts in the structure of the agreement beyond just funding. But certainly those changes to reporting, I think, are a pretty significant improvement and go directly to the things that were sort of acknowledged to be shortcomings in the former NAHA.
Sure. Can you give me some insight into what the rationale was in relation to changing the name rather than just changing those elements, particularly around why it was deemed necessary to rebrand from one to the other when they are, you know, very similar but with perhaps changes to some processes and outcomes?
I probably don't have much to add to what I said before, which is that it's an agreement primarily focused on delivering better outcomes in social housing and on homelessness services. So that's what the agreement purports to be. I think that it's a fairly small but important change to just acknowledge that that's what that agreement is there to do. Of course, the NASH sits in amongst a whole range of other housing initiatives that the government has been pursuing. A lot of that obviously is around home ownership, affordable housing, other elements of the housing spectrum. So I think it makes sense to have a fairly focused Commonwealth state agreement on the on those two particular broad housing needs.
Sure. I just guess I'm wondering why it just needed to be entirely rebranded as opposed to changing what was already there. But that was sort of...
I mean, I'm not sure I'd categorise as rebranding. I mean, prior to the NAHA, there was actually separate agreements on housing and homelessness. They were combined into one. So we've actually seen Commonwealth has had agreements of this nature since 1945 with the states, and I think there's been changes in names through the journey to reflect its purpose.
Thank you. There's been some additional $423 million in funding commitments. Can you give us an insight on how we will ensure, or how the government will ensure that these funds will be used to meet those intended goals and those outcomes of increased social housing and supporting homelessness services, given the current shortages that we have more broadly in housing, the housing crisis, given there's been really no improvement since the election or no meaningful action or improvement?
So it really goes to the outcomes framework and the compulsory measures that the states and territories will need to report on. Prior to this agreement, the NAHA actually had a fairly limited set of accountability arrangements for states. They had to provide a statement of assurance each year, and they had to have a housing strategy. But the content of the strategy or what it was designed to achieve were not actually included in the agreement. This agreement will actually have much more specific measures in it under an outcomes framework. I think that several state and territory housing ministers have observed that will actually, create a bit of tension because it will actually force a conversation about what is actually being delivered. But I think that outcomes framework is the mechanism by which there'll be a stronger sense of what is actually being delivered for the $9.3 billion over 5 years.
And my last question on that piece is what measures do you guys have in place then to ensure that, the impact of funding and in achieving those intended outcomes is actually met?
So statements of assurance will be required each year. As in the past, they'll be published. So that will actually increase the level of public scrutiny over what's being developed, over what's being delivered. And I think through fora such as the Housing Ministers' Ministerial Council, there'll be discussions about what needs to be further tweaked in order to ensure that those outcomes are delivered.
But aside from the state...
I was going to rotate to the Greens now for a 10-minute block, and then I'll come back to you.
Oh, yeah,
or unless you wanted to finish.
It was just finishing that question, but there, 10 seconds, just outside that statement of assurance, I think you called it, what happens if they don't meet it? If someone gives that statement of assurance and then they don't, the assurance isn't met.
Well, I guess that it's like any Commonwealth state agreement. There aren't particular sanctions in the agreement itself, so there's no withholding of funds or particular sanctions. But it will be an uncomfortable position, I guess, for states and territories to be in if publicly you can go to a report and see that they actually haven't delivered what they said they're going to do. So that's really the sort of the overarching accountability mechanism, less so than some particular sanctions in the agreement itself.
Exposure rather than a penalty.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's consistent with having a collaborative agreement. It's not designed for the Commonwealth to set stretch targets and will the states to fail. It's actually encouraging a collaboration of effort, but actually saying it's really important to get a focus on what is actually being delivered for that funding.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr Flavel. I'm coming to the Greens now. Senator Allman-Payne.
Thanks, Chair. I've got some questions about NRAS.
Yes.
Yep. So firstly, how many affordable rentals remain available through NRAS, and what date will they remain affordable until?
So as you know, Senator, with the program being wound down, there's a number that are ceasing of NRAS incentives that are ceasing.
Yeah.
So as at 31st of March this year, there remain 12,895 dwellings, and the numbers that will cease by calendar year are 4,512 in 2024, 3,964 in 2025, and 4,419 in 2026.
Okay. On notice, could we get the locations of those, please?
I'm sure we can provide that. So yeah, I'm happy to take that on notice.
So you've given me how many going forward are going to be exiting. Can you tell me how many affordable rentals have so far exited the market since the NRAS scheme started winding up?
The figure I've got here is 23,468.
Okay, thank you. What measures has the federal government taken to maintain these as affordable rentals?
So, Senator, there haven't been particular measures because, this decision to end the NRAS program was taken in 2014, so there's been a long lead-in period as the 10-year incentives come to an end. The current government has taken a different approach in wanting to, I think, take a broader set of measures in order to deal with some of the challenges in the housing market, some of which I mentioned before in relation to home ownership, but others through the HAF, through the Social Housing Accelerator, that are all designed to get more housing at different points in the spectrum. I think it's important to recognise that a big proportion of NRAS dwellings have been owned by community housing providers and some universities. And while we don't specifically track these properties as they exit, because of course they just become private rentals, to the extent they remain in community housing provider hands, which I think is a pretty reasonable expectation, I think that it would be very likely for those dwellings they would continue to be offered at discounted rents and remain as affordable housing.
All right, that's a nice segue because my next question is, does DSS have data on what proportion of these rentals actually remain in community housing provider ownership?
I can provide a breakdown, but in the interest of time, I'm happy just to provide that on notice if you like.
Yep, that would be good. In relation to, interested to know what information the department has about how many payment recipients are currently in housing stress, that is paying 30% or more of their income on housing costs.
For NRAS, are you talking about, or generally?
Just generally. And I guess I'm interested to know who you are keeping rental stress data for, because I note, for example, do you have it on people other than people receiving rent assistance, or is it only for people receiving rent assistance?
No, we do have it for rent assistance because that's the primary thing that we measure through that is the extent of rental stress that is reduced. I might take on notice in terms of broader measures, whether they sit with Treasury or elsewhere in the system, in terms of broader measurement of housing stress, who collects that?
All right, well, what I'm interested in knowing, for whom you have, for those who are receiving rent assistance, how many people remain in rental stress even after receiving rent assistance? I want to know, what is the median rent paid? What is the median rent assistance payment received? And how much would the maximum rate of rent assistance need to increase to ensure that recipients were not in rental stress?
So, given the complexity of that, I'll take that on notice. We have we report in our annual report, and we have high-level data about the extent to which CRA does reduce rental stress. So the stated aim, as in our annual report in PBS, is to reduce it by at least 25 percentage points, and at the moment it reduces it by around 30.9%.
All right, so is it your expectation that you'd be able to answer those 4 questions for me on notice?
I think we'll have a go. Certainly some components will be much easier than others.
All right, thank you. That's all, Chair, so I don't know if there's any time that Senator Waters can
Yeah,
take.
there is absolutely. You used only 5 minutes. So Senator Waters, I'll come to you and then back to the coalition.
Great, thanks very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I too have got some questions about housing. Just starting off with some homelessness cohorts. Women over 55 had been the fastest growing cohort of homelessness, and I understand that was based on census data from about 10 years ago. But can you tell me, based on the 2021 census data, is that still the case?
There's a lot of data in this set.
So just initially, after the gendered take, what age group of women in particular are now the fastest growing group of women facing homelessness?
I think it's, from the census data, it's actually older people over age 55 are a fast-growing cohort. Certainly, as you observed, I think between the up until the 2016 census, it was older women.
Yes.
Of course, that's proportion. So in absolute terms, there are actually more older men who are homeless. It's just that the older women grew in proportional terms. So
To the population
I'm not
of
trying to
women,
evade. I just think the data here is perhaps best done on notice because there's actually different ways to present it, breaking it down into age and gender, both in terms of absolute numbers and percentage changes.
And proportionality, yeah. Thank you. I mean, thank you for taking that on notice, because on my initial examination, it looked like that actually since 2021, that it was now women aged between 35 and 44 that had even outpaced older women. So I'm really interested in if that demographic shift, if I'm reading that correctly. Do you have any data on whether there's been an increase in younger women experiencing homelessness? And if so, what data have you got?
The data I've got in front of me is by age groups, so not age groups and gender together. So I think I'd best take that on notice.
Yeah, thank you. And likewise, do we have any data on the awful increase in children experiencing homelessness?
So I think it is true that out of the 2021 census, that was one of the fastest growing groups in proportional terms.
Yeah. Do we know how often family, domestic and sexual violence is a factor in people experiencing homelessness?
I think that is collected. I don't think it's collected via the census, but as people go to a specialist homeless service, that is a factor that is registered. The caveat, of course, is that requires somebody to go and see a specialist homeless provider, which of course will understate the extent to which some people will experience family and domestic violence and actually not be presenting for a service.
Yes. So is there any other way that we can actually capture the true number of people experiencing homelessness because of family and domestic and sexual violence?
I'm not sure that I've seen any specific studies that have gone to that, because essentially it is people who are sort of outside that.
Self-disclosure.
Yeah, exactly. So not in the census, not presenting to SHS. I might take that on notice in terms
if you
of
could, because it's
whether
obviously
there's
an
additional data on that.
important data set to try to understand and use to guide policy decisions. Thank you. One of the things that we've heard from crisis housing providers is that, as well as a funding shortfall, there's often no secure longer-term accommodation options to transition people into. So there's huge bottlenecks that those crisis housing providers are facing. Can you talk to me about some of the ways that would remove the pressure from those crisis services?
So there's a number of mechanisms, but certainly the recently announced Crisis and Transitional Accommodation Program, which is actually out in market, so to speak, at the moment in terms of that grant opportunity, is one way. So we were talking earlier about the Safe Places program, and that is very much around crisis accommodation. The Crisis Transitional Accommodation Program, or CTAP, is $100 million coming out of the HAF, and that is specifically to actually broaden the category of housing so that it does become longer-term transitional accommodation, in recognition, exactly as you've said, that often it's the pathway between crisis and a longer-term housing solution that's often most at play. We'll have to wait and see in terms of the demand. Certainly what we've seen in the Safe Places round is an oversubscription, so more applications received than grants. We'll have to wait until later in the year in terms of seeing how many applications are actually made for that CTAP, but I think it'll give a good indication of the demand and the ability of providers who operate those services to actually, to seek the capital to actually start those things up.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, our party was very supportive of a proportion of that money being allocated for precisely that purpose. But how did you find the 100 as the amount? Was there a measure done of the amount of need and then the money allocated to meet that need? Or what was the basis for choosing 100 million?
So that was the commitment, I think, that the government made as part of its overall approach to the HAF, the Housing Australia Future Fund.
Yes, but I'm asking why. Why was that figure
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think it was an election commitment made, so I can't sort of add any more than that in terms of the rationale for the 100 million.
Could you take on notice whether the department provided any reason for that kind of figure to be chosen, whether there was any analysis of done?
We won't have, because it was done by the government in opposition, so we wouldn't have provided advice.
No advice provided on that. Okay, so is that funding to alleviate existing shortfalls, or is it to drive innovation? You mentioned that there's potential for it to be invested in longer-term funding. Can you just run me through?
Sorry, longer-term accommodation.
Sorry, that kettle is very noisy. I'll just shut the door while you're talking. Oh, thank you, Anne. That's kind of you.
It's for longer-term accommodation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, could you give me a bit more detail of that on notice, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. How does the government work to resource co-located and entry point specialist services for people in crisis in the community?
In terms of the housing solutions?
Yes.
Well, through different mechanisms, including the ones that we've been talking about. Remembering that in the majority of cases, these services are actually provided by state governments. So a large part of the sort of response and answer will be the state governments who are providing a lot of those frontline services.
Okay, that doesn't fill me with confidence. What more is the Commonwealth doing rather than just delegating it down to a different level of government?
Well, it's not delegated. That's actually, consistent with...
Yes, but you have the funding.
Well, I mean, the states actually, in relation to homelessness generally, actually spend more than they're required to, in terms of their reporting.
Why is the Commonwealth not spending more than it's required to then?
That's asking me for an opinion that I can't really go to that.
Let's compete up rather than compete down.
Yeah. That's right. As the Secretary just reminded me, is the commitments under the NASH, the new national agreement, actually see the commitment to match funding go from $127 million to $400 million a year, each and every year under the national agreement on social housing and homelessness.
Yep.
Which was signed in the middle of this year. It's now a requirement that the states and territories spend at least $400 million of the Commonwealth's, match $400 million of Commonwealth spending on homelessness services under that agreement.
Okay, thank you. Will the government review the provision of capital funding to upgrade facilities in existing housing crisis services to improve safety and accessibility for community members?
I'm not sure. I mean, that's really a question for government. I can't provide a response on that. Sorry, Senator.
Okay. Minister, is that anything you want to shed any light on?
I'm happy to come back after I've had a conversation with the Minister about that for you, Senator.
Thanks very much.
So I'm due to rotate now.
Okay, just two more quick ones and then I'm done?
Yeah,
thank you. So we've talked a bit about how building more public housing would help take the pressure off those crisis services and would make a real meaningful difference to people in communities supporting people impacted by homelessness, which is right across the country and particularly pronounced in certain areas. So can you just tell me what funding is there to support the development of affordable housing, exiting homelessness service systems into affordable housing?
So look, that really matters for Treasury, but I mean there's a range of things that, including the Housing Australia Future Fund, the Social Housing Accelerator, the Accord, commitments to get to the 1.2 million new homes, that are all designed to increase overall supply. That means that for those people who are sadly in a situation of homelessness or marginally attached, there is more opportunity for them. There's not one single thing. There's actually a range of different measures being implemented to try and ensure that there are those pathways out. For some people, that'll be a social housing outcome. For others, it'll be into affordable housing. For some, it may be into home ownership. I think what I'd observe at the moment about housing policy is it's seeking to increase supply across the full spectrum of those housing areas of housing.
And same question as before, was there a measure of unmet need undertaken before those various amounts and different pots were determined?
Well, I think it's just a matter of fact that the government's committed to actually increasing housing supply. You know,
that was my question though. Was there an unmet need measurement done in the design of the size of those packages?
I think that the National Housing Affordability Supply Council actually, as part of their reporting, does regularly report on undersupply.
And does that guide the government's decision-making in designing the shape and size of the funding that you've just outlined?
What is an input? Absolutely, yeah.
An input?
Yeah.
Okay, are you seeking to meet unmet need?
Well, I'm talking here about the full range of government programs, many of which sit outside this portfolio. I'm just making a general observation that the Supply Council is tasked with providing an independent view about the shortfall of housing, and that, is a public report, and governments are then held to account for what they're actually doing in order to meet that shortfall.
Yes, but is the government's intention to measure and then meet the unmet need for housing?
Well, that's really a matter for the Housing Minister. I'll take that on notice.
Okay. Thank you. I hope the answer is yes.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Senator
much.
Waters. I think we're coming to the last block on housing now, and then we can move on. So, Senator Kovacic.
My questions are around the over 1,000 more homes for Queensland scheme.
I think that might be Treasury. Sorry, Senator. Sure.
I have it for here. You're unable to answer those questions. They're definitely for Treasury.
Are you talking about? Yeah, there's no program within the DSS space that goes.
You don't collaborate with that housing, particularly in relation to, given it's state public housing. You guys don't deal with that.
I mean, if you're talking about the Queensland government's commitment for more public or social housing, then there isn't a particular form of collaboration. As I said earlier, the Commonwealth makes a contribution via the National Agreement on Social Housing and Homelessness, but it's up to individual states to have their own strategies for how they're going to actually meet social housing need. And many of them do have those plans and strategies.
It was unveiled by the Prime Minister and the Queensland Premier with the suggestion that the Albanese government was going to work with the community housing sector at all levels to boost supply. So I was trying to understand where that fits in and how that was happening. So whether, that would fall under the housing piece of DSS. So you're suggesting that it doesn't?
I think that it's more appropriate for Treasury because it goes to things like the allocations out of the HAF that are designed to increase the level of both social and affordable housing, the Social Housing Accelerator program, which also is the responsibility of Treasury in particular.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Let me just check. Okay, that's it then.
Thanks, Senator Kovacic. Just seek confirmation from the committee that we're happy to move to the next outcome. With noise, yep. Thank you. In that case, thank you to DSS officials who are here for outcome 4. You are free to depart. We'll now be moving to DSS outcome 1. What I was going to propose, Senators, is given there's often overlap between whole of portfolio, corporate matters and outcome 1, that we just deal with them concurrently and move through them as a combined block. So if Senators are happy to do that. So outcome 1 and whole of portfolio we'll just deal with interchangeably as opposed to separating them. So, okay. I will maintain the call with the opposition. So is that Senator Kovacic?
My questions relate to job seeker, or my initial set of questions. Are we good to go? Yep, perfect. How many Australians are currently receiving the job seeker payment?
So, Senator, at the end of September 2024, the number of job seeker payment recipients was 832,095.
Thank you. And on that latest data set available, how many of those job seeker recipients had no reported earnings for the financial years 22-23 and 23-24, or the latest set that you have available?
So earnings are not done on an annual basis because under the legislation, people are required to report earnings each fortnight in order to get their fortnightly entitlement. In the most recent period on job seeker, 79.9% had no earnings, and obviously 20.1% had earnings.
So that's just in the last...
That would have been at the end of September for that fortnight.
Okay, so you don't collate the cumulative fortnights for people?
No, because it will be difficult as people come on and off payment,
Gotcha,
because
okay.
Some people will be on for part of the year and then we'll move into full-time work, for instance. So it's really designed to provide, well, we could report on every fortnight, that's quite detailed, but this gives a snapshot. That sort of figure of around 20% has historically been the level for job seeker payment and New Start in terms of people who report earnings in any fortnight. So
it's fairly consistent to say that, generally speaking, 80% of people don't report any earnings whatsoever.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. How many job seeker recipients have had their payment reduced due to earning over the threshold?
I'm not sure. So under job seeker, you can earn up to $150 a fortnight and not have your payment reduced. I don't know that I've got, and so by definition, everybody above that will be on a part rate because they'll be subject to the taper, and then beyond a certain point, they'll receive nil. I might take on notice if you're interested in a more granular breakdown.
That would be great. Thank you. Do you have the percentage of job seekers that exit the payment within a year due to them finding employment?
We do. I'm just not sure I've got that with me on this occasion.
Okay. If we could have that on notice if
Absolutely,
you don't have it at hand. Of those that don't exit within that year, what is the average time spent receiving that working age pension effectively?
Yeah. So, sorry, to just go, I've found what we report on those that have been on payment for less than a year, and that's 34.6% of people on job seeker, 12.9% 1 to 2 years, 20.5% 2 years to less than 5, and then 32% 5 or more years.
Do you have data for the 5 or more, how that's broken down, or able to provide that on notice?
Yes, we probably, I don't have it here, but we could take on notice. It would be helpful if you were interested in particular bands to know that.
I'd just be curious at how those bands, how you collect them and how they taper out, particularly in terms of, long-term unemployment, I guess.
Yeah, we can take that on notice.
Thank you. For the financial years 22-23 and 23-24, how many job seekers had their payments either suspended or cancelled due to not meeting the mutual obligation requirements?
We won't have that on a financial year basis for the reason I said earlier, that we collect each fortnight. So in order to provide a financial year, we'd have to aggregate up the 26 fortnights. We can do that, but obviously we'd have to take that on notice.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. And do you have the data set for the most recent time period, the most recent fortnight?
I do. So around 6.3% were suspended from payment.
And cancelled?
I don't have cancelled, and the reason is sometimes people will ring up and say, I found a job, I'm no longer reporting. Some others will just stop reporting, so they'll move into employment and they'll stop reporting. So it's actually quite hard to give a definitive answer sometimes of cancellations and what's driving them and whether they're contemporary, because some people will just drop out of the system and they'll be registered a cancellation at some point in the future, but it may well be that they found work 3 months prior to that, they've just stopped reporting.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. For those that have had their job seeker suspended first, what's the average duration of that suspension? And then if it's a cancellation, is like if something's cancelled, does that begin again? So is that cancellation effectively suspended at some point if they lose that job, or how does that work if there's data on that? But I guess my first question is, what's the average duration of the suspension, and then how would the same work for a cancellation?
Well, look, we might need to talk to our colleagues in the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, because they, in fact, manage the targeted compliance framework, which is the series of suspensions. It's not uncommon for some people to be suspended and to have that removed pretty quickly. So a standard case might be somebody who doesn't show up for an appointment with an employment services provider may accrue a suspension. The suspension doesn't, under the targeted compliance framework, doesn't mean they get no payment or a lesser payment. There's a series of, the framework allows a series of negatives, if you like, before you actually face a financial penalty. But there are people who, of course, will have a legitimate reason, and they'll get that reinstated pretty quickly.
How quickly can that be reinstated once it's suspended or cancelled?
Well, for people who might be, say, a first offence, where it might have been not showing up, and it turns out they did, and the job service provider, in fact, just characterise them, that can be done pretty quickly.
Data entry error or something.
Yeah, that can be done quickly within sort of a matter of days.
Yeah.
For those people, I mean, if that's happening within an entitlement fortnight, there is no impact on their payment as a result of that.
Yeah. Okay. And with a cancellation, how often can that be reinstated?
Yeah, I mean,
Or soon,
there's two types of cancellations. There's people who might actually be cancelled from payment because they've gone through the entire targeted compliance framework and basically just disengaged. That's different than the cancellation I was talking about before, where somebody might actually say, I'm cancelling my payment because I've got a job. I no longer want to engage with Service Australia, I don't need to, and they effectively cancel themselves off payment.
Yep. Okay. With the job seeker requirement to seek that to reach that 100-point target as a part of the mutual obligations, can you sort of give us an idea of examples where that requirement might be relaxed for any particular reasons, or when that could occur?
So, Senator, that's actually a question you've got to pose to the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. They manage the targeted compliance framework, they manage the points-based activation system, which is what you're referring to. So in terms of how that's administered, they're questions you're going to have to put to them.
Sure. So DSS doesn't have any oversight of that?
We don't have policy responsibility, where it intersects with the social security law in the sense that if people accrue suspensions and get cancelled from payment, then obviously there's implications. But the administration in terms of day-to-day of that is actually a matter for the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations.
Would they communicate that kind of thing with you, like when something like that might be relaxed, or that's entirely out of your, that's not something you talk to them about? Or they talk to you about?
Well, we talk to them, but they own that framework. So in terms of how the points requirements work, how people might accrue different points in terms of meeting their obligations, that's really a matter for them, where they consult with us, but they administer that component.
It was more about when that might be relaxed. So would you have an awareness of what those circumstances are, and do you have any input or insight into that? So, if someone hasn't reached their 100 points, what would be the circumstances under which effectively that would be forgiven?
Well, I think that's laid out in the targeted compliance framework, which is theirs to manage. So I don't really want to go to that. Sorry, Senator.
Thank you. Has DSS and Workforce Australia had any discussions then about reducing this point target, or is that, again, not something that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Not at all?
No, well, there hasn't been any recent discussions. I'm not aware of sort of any major reviews or changes, rather, that are being discussed at the moment.
So only historic stuff that hasn't gone anywhere?
Sorry, has there been any?
So the only discussions would be historic discussions that haven't gone anywhere, so nothing current or live at the moment?
Not that I'm aware of, no, Senator.
Thank you. Have job seeker mutual obligation requirements been paused at any time since the COVID-19 pandemic?
I might see if one of my colleagues can answer, but certainly there are periods where generally they're paused, so things like over Christmas. But outside of those sort of general ones, I can't recall any that have been in recent times.
Sure. So were one of your colleagues going to talk to that, or did you want to ask the next one?
Yeah, I don't think there have been. I mean, other than the Easter, Christmas periods, which are effectively for everybody,
Yeah.
I can't recall there's been any other sort of nationwide or generalised pausing of mutual obligations.
Okay.
There can be the only caveat is there can be some occasions where if there are issues with the system that the Department of Employment Workplace Relations uses, that can sometimes be used as a reason for switching those off.
Okay.
The only other ones remain. And my colleague has just reminded me that under the Remote Employment Services Program, there are no mutual obligations at present.
Okay.
And that's been for some time. That's not necessarily a last year. That's been a longer standing issue.
Okay.
Senator, at this point I might seek to rotate to the Greens and then I'll come back to you. So Senator Ullman-Payne.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got some questions around income apportionment. Yep. And I'm going to, referring to your statement, Mr Griggs, that you made on the 23rd of October, I think, 2024, in which you'd said that in April 2024, Services Australia restarted a limited number of internal reviews, explanations of decisions and new debt-raising activities in line with the department's interpretation of the law. And then further down you talked about the fact that you were effectively pausing internal reviews, explanations of decisions and raising of new debts potentially affected by income apportionment. So that's the statement that I'm referring to. Yep. So first question is, the statement sets out that DSS directed Services Australia to pause all activity. Are you able to tell us what date that DSS directed Services Australia to pause all activity?
Have you got the dates?
I think it was just in a couple of days before that statement.
Yeah. Look, we'll get that on notice.
Okay, but you think it's roughly a couple of days?
Within that week before the Secretary's statement was made.
Okay, if you can clarify and notice, that'd be great. Yeah. So my next question then is, between April 2024 and pausing activity, how many new debt-raising activities were undertaken?
So no new ones. These were reviews of existing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it was
so none between April and that statement actually being made?
No new.
None?
No.
Okay.
But in terms of reviews and things, it was actually quite a limited number. We can get that information from Services Australia.
Because I was going to ask for detail as well on the nature of any new debt-raising activities between April 2024 and pausing.
Mr Berra from Service Australia has remained in order to be able to answer questions specifically about this, the activities in terms of the pause.
Because I guess my question, just to come back to the release, the statement said that in April 2024, Services Australia restarted a limited number of internal reviews, explanations of decisions and new debt-raising activities. So, and it says in line with the interpretation, but then you've said in October there's an effective pause. So I guess my question is it your position
can I just give you the context of why that took place?
Yeah.
So I received legal advice in March, April that I had an obligation under the Act to restart because we had what we believed to be a settled legal position around the calculation of debts. Then, of course, with the AAT decision in FTXB, in the case FTXB, we did not any longer have a settled legal position, even though we still hold the view, we're still confident in our position. And of course, because it's subject to appeal, I felt it was important to not continue, to repause, and then of course you'll see later in the statement where individuals feel they want it resolved because they might be prevented from doing something else with an outstanding Commonwealth debt. We've laid out sort of the terms and conditions, if you like, about. We're happy to proceed and resolve that, but we may have to come back to you if the court decides a different way.
Yeah, And I understand that. So I guess my question is, noting that the release says that you restarted activity in April and then changed your view when closer to the time that... Yep. So my question then is, between April, when you had restarted, and then when you paused, how many new debt-raising activities were undertaken? So is it your position that actually, even though you said restart, there weren't any?
No, I think Mr Birra can probably answer that question.
Thanks, Secretary. Hi, Senator. Chris Birra, Deputy Chief Executive Officer, Payments and Integrity at Services Australia. After what we term Stage 1 recommencement of activities in April, in terms of the debts that you were talking about, looking at potential overpayments and the raising of those, we commenced 349 and we finished 83 of those.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to give me any further detail, Mr Birra, on the nature of the new debt-raising activities that happened between April and the second pause?
Yeah, so those activities, and you'll recall last time we were here, Senator, we discussed how Stage 1 was about testing our communications, our staff guidance and our processes in order to implement the preferred methodology of income apportionment. In terms of those potential overpayments, they were potential overpayments that had dated from pre-7th of December 2020, and so we're in the period before that, the change of assessment model, which altered sort of the approach of calculating entitlements. That required our staff to review what was on customer records, contact customers and speak to them about what additional information they may have, and then to also contact former employers to see if they had further information in keeping with the guidance that was issued about seeking to find daily rates or other payroll information that could help with the recalculations.
Okay. How many staff are assigned to work on income apportionment cases in Services Australia, and what would be the cost of that staff allocation?
I'll ask Ms Clark to answer that.
Rachel Clark, General Manager, Integrity Response for Services Australia. We have 153 staff in total, broken into an operations team of 126 staff and a response team of 27 staff, but I'd have to take the financials on notice. All
right, thank you. I note that in the annual report, just trying to see what page it is, at 7.1, contingent assets and liabilities, yep. Continued, talks about personal benefits. I think it's from page 262.
262.
Yep. I note that it says that income apportionment is a practice that related to debts incurred from the early 1990s to the 7th of December 2020. Can you explain when and how the department was made aware of the possibility that this problem reached back as far as the early 1990s?
So, Senator, in preparing, I went back and looked at the evidence I gave in May, and I think I referred then to the fact that it said it was at least 2003. And at the time, that was because there was changes to the Social Security Act where we could be quite precise. The words, the way in which income was calculated, first earned, derived, received, which is the subject of the legal issues we're talking about, first appeared in the Social Security Act when it was constructed in 1991. It's the current piece of legislation, Social Security Act 1991. So the reference to the early 90s is just making a general observation that in 1991 that's what the law said, and so we, I think through sampling and other means, have identified that it would at least go back to that period. Okay, so considering that predates section 1073B, what's the department's view on the source of the potential unlawfulness of income apportionment? I'm not sure if maybe I should get the Chief Counsel to answer that question. Sorry, Senator.
evening, Senator Bronwyn Morswick, Chief Counsel. We have done a fairly extensive amount of research and looking back over the legislation. We don't necessarily know that there's a point in time that we can attribute to the commencement of the practice. What we do know is that there were challenges in understanding how to properly apportion employment income in a period, and we're still really investigating and trying to understand where we've got to. All the legislation has been reviewed. We've looked back over various amendment acts. Officials who've been working in Services Australia for many, many decades have been interviewed, and we've also spoken to all of the major academics and sort of senior commentators who've had evidence and who spoke, for example, in the Robo-Debt Royal Commission to understand what knowledge they might have of the origins of the practice. And no one has really been able to tell us about a specific point in time or a specific rationale for how it has emerged. But we are still continuing to make those investigations as new information comes to light.
All right, thank you. What communication, if any, has the department had with the Ombudsman with respect to the expanded scope of the income apportionment problem?
We've been in regular contact with the Ombudsman throughout, Senator.
Okay, so...
I spoke to him as recently as when the statement came out. I rang him to tell him about the statement and rationale and what we were doing. So we're in pretty regular contact.
Okay. What communication, if any, has the department had with Commonwealth Department of Public Prosecutions with respect to the expanded scope of the income apportionment problem?
I can answer that. Bronwyn Morswick, Chief Counsel. We met with the Commonwealth DPP, I think it was last week, and I'll just indicate for the committee's benefit, we've been meeting fortnightly with the CDPP for over the last 12 months. We continue to update them on what we're finding and what developments have occurred in our end. The CDPP has told us they are continuing to monitor the situation and wish to continue our engagement. They consider they've told us they've completed all of their disclosure obligations. I think in previous hearings we've given you evidence about the extent of those obligations being fulfilled, and we will continue to meet with them and update as we go. The last meeting we had with them, we were advised that there's been no efforts by any of the individuals to appeal or lodge appeals in relation to convictions associated with these matters.
Okay, thank you. Has the department received advice from the Solicitor General regarding unlawful income apportionment?
Senator, it's a long-standing practice of the Commonwealth that we don't reveal matters pertaining to legal advice given to the Commonwealth, including in relation to the question that you've just posed.
So I haven't asked for the content of it. I've asked, have you received it?
Again, Senator, it's not a matter that I'm able to confirm in this setting, in line with the Commonwealth's long-standing practice of not revealing the existence or source of legal advice to the Commonwealth.
All right. Well, with that in mind then, I just want to note that in September, a Public Service Code of Conduct investigation found that 2 former secretaries had breached the Public Service Code of Conduct because of failures to act with due care and diligence, failures to ensure that internal and external legal advice was sought about the legality of the robo-debt scheme, failures to respond to public criticism as well as academic and legal criticism of the scheme, misrepresentations to the Ombudsman regarding the legal position of the department, failure to ensure the Solicitor General was expeditiously briefed and advice sought about the scheme's unlawfulness, failure to expeditiously inform the Minister of the Solicitor General's advice on the lawfulness of the scheme. So I guess noting the recency, clarity and seriousness of these findings, I ask the following. Has the Secretary expeditiously ensured that advice has been received for the Solicitor General in relation to this matter?
I'm very comfortable where I'm sitting in relation to all of those things you mentioned.
Okay.
If I could just add, Senator, throughout this process, we have maintained very frequent updates to the Office of Legal Services Coordination within the Attorney-General's Department, as is proper for the First Law Officer's agency to be aware of what we're doing. We consult regularly with them. We meet with them every step that has been taken in relation to the management of matters in the Administrative Review Tribunal and in relation to the Secretary's decisions around his responsibilities with respect to administration of social security law have been made in close consultation with the support of the relevant agencies. And we've been very transparent about that, and all agencies involved in this process are aware, and we've continued to talk with them and will continue to meet with them.
All right. Just know I've only got a couple of questions in this block, Chair, and then I'm moving on to a different topic, so you can tell me if you want me to move on. As in rotate, I mean.
Yeah, you are due to rotate, but if you want
just got to
finish on this topic.
Yeah. I note, Mr Griggs, that in your 23rd of October statement you said that you remain confident in the interpretation of the law advanced by your department, and you'll be making submissions to that effect during the appeal process. Has DSS received advice from the Solicitor General regarding that position?
I think I said, when I said I was very comfortable where I'm at.
That's your answer? Yep, thank you. Has the department completed any financial risk modelling relating to the different legal conclusions that may be reached in the full federal court and the different implications that those decisions may have for resolving the matter?
Not at this point in terms of specific risk modelling. Obviously, we're giving consideration, though, to the forward path on this issue, including all the potential outcomes that might occur.
Okay, and so that includes financial risk modelling?
I didn't say financial risk modelling. I said we're giving consideration to all the possible outcomes from a broad policy perspective.
Thank you. I'm happy to see the call for the time being.
And I'm returning to the opposition. So Senator Little.
I'd like to ask a few questions, please, around child support. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can we release the Services Australia? Any further questions on income apportionment from other senators? Or?
No, mine are on DSP.
Sorry, who are you seeking to?
To our Services Australia colleagues who stay behind to do the income apportionment.
To do this part, okay.
We don't have any more.
No, we're happy to release.
Thank you.
Run for your life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Run quick.
Yes, it's me.
You again? Okay. So I'd like to ask, can you outline the supports, safeguards and assistance that DSS provides to single parents who are harassed by former partners who falsify their financial records to avoid paying child support and use that as a form of coercive control?
So, Senator, this is something that obviously is very high, a high priority for us at the moment, not just in relation to child support, but more generally looking across the social security system in ways that it could be weaponised. In relation to both child support and social security, we're looking at what further enhancements can be made to service delivery, which is really a matter for Services Australia. What other kind of other small p policy changes could be made to try and avoid some of those things, and then further consideration of legislation and or policy changes that would stamp out those sorts of things.
What data are you relying on to understand what's actually happening in that area?
So one of the things that we're doing at the moment is under the response to the family law inquiry report, which included a number of recommendations on child support, are looking at data, but also a survey of, I think it's around 800 separated parents, to get a more detailed sense of their interactions with the social security system, including some of the issues that you raise. We also have a child support consultation group that was re-established after the family law inquiry that includes the Single Mothers Australia group and a range of other stakeholders, and they bring a number of perspectives in terms of people's experiences. So that all goes into improving our understanding of some of the ways in which the system is being misused, and that will form part of the inputs into that policy advice and other changes that could be contemplated in relation to those practices. Yeah.
Can you tell me how much has been allocated in the budget and across the forward estimates to recover debt associated with child support payments?
Well, that's really for Service Australia because they administer the scheme. So in terms of the staff they have involved in debt recovery, that's something, unfortunately, as you know, they were on earlier, so they're not here to answer that question. Happy to take it on notice, but in terms of the resources they're applying to it, that's really for them.
Thank you. You may give me the same answer to this one, but I'm happy if you can take it on notice if that is the answer. How much child support is currently outstanding?
I can give you that.
Thank you.
Let's publish debt figures. So at the end of the last financial year, so 23-24, 1.83 billion.
And how does that compare to the previous same period?
Yep, so the year before, as at 30 June, it was 1.74 billion. The year before that, 1.69. So we are seeing a small growth in debt outstanding. Bearing in mind, of course, there's there's more than 1 million parents in the system currently, and some of those debts will relate to parents who are no longer in the system as well.
So you were talking about the consultations that you rely on to give you. I mean, surely that's enough evidence to know that greater resourcing is required if we're increasing by a significant amount every year.
And indeed,
trend.
yeah, and indeed. So, I mean, one of the important issues, one of many, of course, is the issue of tax lodgement, which goes to the issue you raised about either underreporting or misreporting income. There's a range of measures that have been adopted in terms of referring people to the ATO in terms of their compliance enforcement, because obviously once there's a valid tax return, then that forms a very solid basis for determining a child support amount. In addition, there's other sanctions that can be applied to people, including things like departure prohibition orders if people are actually seeking to leave the country and have child support debts. So I think there are measures. Clearly, it remains an area of focus, though, to try and bring that number down. So
last year with Coalition Support, child support measures legislation was passed to improve child support debt recovery. One would assume there are additional preventative measures. Where has there been an improvement then, if the debt level has not improved?
The measures you're talking about will include some of the stuff, things I was mentioning earlier, such as the changes to the law in relation to departure prohibition orders, and increased focus or increased attention to actually referring people not complying with the tax obligations to the ATO. There was also other measures as part of that sort of suite of arrangement. So there are people, of course, who don't need to lodge a tax return, but ensuring that that process works so that that bit of information is transmitted from the tax office to Service Australia in order to get a correct calculation.
So since those new measures from the child support measures legislation were passed, how many departure order certificates have been refused?
I don't think I've got the actual figures. When the measure was announced, it was anticipated, and I stress anticipated, that it would affect about 110 parents per year.
Right. So can you take that on notice to provide a more accurate number?
Yep.
Or something you're more confident with? How much deductible liabilities have been collected after an enforceable maintenance liability period has ended?
I might need to take that on notice. Thanks.
Okay. I want to turn now to the issue of people who receive money who are not actually the carers of children, and what might be being done to address that. Recently I've received letters telling me that the father of the child that is receiving child support as the principal carer is not actually providing care, and in fact in some instances the father is in a different state to the child and yet is still receiving the payment What safeguards do you have in place to stop that occurring and at the earliest opportunity?
So just for clarity, you're talking about child support payments that somebody might be receiving when they're not providing care?
That's right.
Well, I mean, the child support system obviously intersects with the family law system. The family law system is the mechanism by which parents come to an agreement or have a court determine that in terms of custodial matters. That is then used in the child support formula in terms of the proportion of care being provided. If that is not being... So there's two issues. One is about non-compliance with a court order. That's really a matter for Attorney Generals. But in terms of the child support formula, the other parent can apply to have a reassessment done. There's a series of circumstances in which child support parents can ask for a reassessment. So, for instance, if they consider that their former partner or the other parent may have other sources of income or be underreporting or is not complying, so that the child support formula doesn't properly reflect the extent of care they're providing, that can actually be reviewed by Services Australia at the request of the other parent.
And these next two questions relate to, in some way, to that. How much money does the department allocate to child support for parents of children over 18 years old of age? And what is the criteria for receiving that payment if you're over 18?
So we don't allocate... I mean, the department has policy responsibility. Services Australia does the administration. There are some circumstances in which child support can be paid for children over 18. That is generally the case when the child is turning 18 in their last year of schooling. We'd probably have to take on notice what amounts are collected if we do, in fact, have that information.
Okay. And is it true that a request can be made that the funding be extended and yet there is no assessment required or attached to that request for continued funding for a child over 18? I've had people tell me that the request has been made by the father that does not have the child in their care, and they've requested an extension, and that has just been given rather than an assessment or an assessment that includes a conversation with the other parent.
Yeah, so I'll come back to you maybe on specifics, but as I said earlier, the circumstances in which an extension occurs after age 18 are if the child is in their last year of schooling. So that, of course, assumes that at that point, they might be halfway through year 12, that there's no changes, no other changes taking place that would alter the existing child support arrangement. So it really just continues for a defined period until the end of that calendar year, the pre-existing. There's not a reassessment done. And what it does is recognises that 18 is obviously the age at which under the system people are no longer considered to be a child, but in those particular circumstances they will often still be in the care of their parents while they complete their schooling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We're due to keep rotating, so I'll keep moving and pass the call to Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, Chair. Excuse me. I wanted to touch on some of the child support issues that you've covered, and I have listened carefully to your responses, so thanks for that so far. Can I take you firstly to the 6th of September commitment, which I understand was a commitment to undertake excuse me, an audit of child support, social security and ATO to identify where they're being weaponised by perpetrators of family, domestic and sexual violence. Can you just tell me when will this audit start and when will it be completed? And who's doing it? Is it an internal audit or are you appointing some other expert body to do it?
So, Senator, the audit is being coordinated by the Office for Women. And I think Ms Rahman may have given evidence earlier in the week.
Yes, I asked questions of them, but
frames.
I don't tend to find them very forthcoming.
Right.
So here we are.
So we have already commenced work with Services Australia.
Yep.
In relation to the social security system and the child support system, to as Mr Flavel said earlier, to systematically try and identify these potential points of weaponisation, drawing on the inputs and the consultation mechanisms that we have, develop. Basically, what we're trying to do is to get to sort of three tiers of activities, things that we can basically do now that don't require legislation, don't require resourcing or very much resourcing, things that are will require us to probably go through some sort of government process in terms of resource allocation, and then things that may well require significant policy change or legislative change. So that's the framing that we're trying to take this work, and we are working as hard as we can on it at the moment.
So is that the same thing as the audit, or is that some parallel process?
It will be our input into the audit.
Into the audit. Okay,
yes.
Thanks. So when are you going to have that assessment done and sent in to Office for Women?
I hope before the end of the year will be, and I suspect, to be honest, Senator, it will be a little bit iterative. We'll have a big, first a first sort of swathe of it, and then probably go back, revisit, and continue to work on it.
Yes. Okay. So is there an intention to implement any of those tiers, perhaps most likely the first tier, this term of government?
The aim of that first tier is really things that we can do almost straight away.
Yes, but is it your intention to do them this term?
That would be, we would put that advice to the Minister, yes.
Okay, so that's a matter for government, but you're doing the work so that there would be time to do them
the aim of it is things that really is not that difficult to do. So that's why we're trying to identify some do now things.
Okay. Will you be suggesting to the Minister that the ones in the second category, or even the third for that matter, be undertaken in this term of government?
Well, we'll provide the advice to the Minister on what we've discovered and what we think what the range of options are.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that, in my view, could be done immediately would be to abolish the link between family tax benefit A and child support, as you've touched on already, so that it could no longer be used to perpetuate violence. Is that a reform that fits into that first category that you think could be done, fairly readily?
I think that one would require legislative change. So I think you're referring to the maintenance action test and the maintenance income test, and those would require legislative change if the aim, for instance, was to abolish those.
Okay. I do have some extremely detailed questions about the maintenance income test, but I was going to put those on notice. So I think for everyone's sake, I will put those on notice. So thanks for raising that. Have you done any policy work in delinking family payments from child support?
Well, I mean, it really goes to the issues you've raised around the maintenance action test and the maintenance income test.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things to say. I referred earlier to the work that we're doing under the response to the family law inquiry and the survey of separated parents.
Yes,
and we are sort of
800 people.
Yeah, and we're seeking. Well, I mean, it's 800,
sample?
but it's also
a representative sample.
A representative sample, yes, but that's not exclusively it. The consultation group that I also mentioned that meets 2 or 4 times a year also includes all of the key stakeholder advocates.
They are very agitated on this particular issue, and they've been making this particular policy suggestion for quite some time. So is that under consideration?
Well, everything's under consideration. I think when you look at the maintenance action test, it does apply to a very large number of people in the child support system, many of whom actually have no issues in complying with it. Separately, there are people who, for reasons of fear of violence, do seek an exemption, and that's appropriate, and that's the policy working in action. I guess we're looking at, are there further changes that can be made to preserve the principle there, remembering this is a reinforcing mechanism to ensure that children are actually getting
the support they need.
And breaking that link does have implications. So the maintenance action test has been around for a long, long time and does achieve that goal. Are there circumstances in which exemptions to the MAT, as it's known, could be applied? Those are the sorts of things.
Yeah.
We do know that, removing the maintenance action test, is a relatively costly proposal. It costs somewhere in the range of $2 to $3 billion across the Ford estimates. So in providing advice, we would want to be looking at alternatives that might achieve the goal, but actually deal with some of the people who maybe should be getting an exemption, but aren't for whatever reason.
And you're looking at what those reasons are?
Looking at the interaction. So some of it, people can request an exemption based on fear of violence.
Yes, assuming they know they can do that.
Assuming, and so that exactly goes to the point. There's issues there about communication, about how readily available information is, about the support mechanisms.
How much time they've got to sit on the phone before they get that advice from someone.
A range of issues in the delivery. So, and again, some of those things go to the Secretary's point. They can be done as service delivery things that might have some resource implications but don't require changes in legislation. Abolishing the maintenance action test would require legislation, be costly, and raise issues about how do you ensure that parents are actually complying with their obligations to provide a minimum level of maintenance in all cases and take responsibility for their children.
Okay. Well, in a similar vein, have you done any policy work on moving child support collections to the ATO?
We haven't done any work on that. As you would know, I think it's been at least 2 decades now since the Child Support Agency came out of the ATO and was moved into what is now Services Australia. Services Australia obviously is interacting with people already in a range of on things like family tax benefit. So there is the benefit of having a single agency dealing with these issues. The tax office has obviously moved to a quite different model in terms of its engagement with individuals. Fortunately, because of pre-filling and the use of electronic tax, people don't go into a tax office anymore in the way that they did sort of 20 or 30 years ago. There would be issues like that. What I would say, though, is that the tax office and DSS and Service Australia work very closely together on the particular issue about tax lodgement, because that is really at the crux, I think, of this.
Yes, it is.
And in that sense, it doesn't really matter where child support is delivered from. It's actually about how do we ensure that people are properly complying with their tax obligations, because when they do, then there is a very robust way to determine the basis upon which the child support formula works. It's why more and more non-compliant parents are being referred as part of the lodgement enforcement program, and why it remains a very high priority for us to look at ways to ensure that people are complying with tax in order to have that benefit for having proper assessments being made under the child support legislation.
Could you take on notice for me, please, how many people have been referred under that lodgement enforcement program, please? Don't tell me now, because I've got a couple of other questions and it's almost my time. Perhaps if there's time at the end. Have you done any policy work on making the payment of debts owed to the Commonwealth, rather than having the woman, the single parent, who is then responsible for chasing the unpaid child support? Have you done any work on actually making that a debt recoverable by the Commonwealth?
No. It is raised as an issue and has been for some time. Obviously, that would fundamentally change the nature of the system, because for more than 30 years it has been a mechanism by which two parents, in an administrative way, make that contribution. Becoming a debt of the Commonwealth fundamentally changes that.
Yeah, it would, but it might help. Are you looking at it?
Well, there are ways. So many people will opt into agency collect as the mechanism. So as you know, there's roughly 50% of people in the child support system go through the agency, 50% do private collect. People can opt into agency collect as a way of strengthening compliance, because that gives a much stronger mechanism to actually chase underpayments.
Yes, they're still waiting on the money, though. It's still not a guarantee that the Commonwealth will pay, and then the Commonwealth will pursue the debt against the unpaying person.
But it is a different system than private collect, where there's no interaction with government at all. And as I said, one of the issues in that survey of separated parents is about compliance issues. I think you've raised in this committee before, it is quite tricky to actually get to the issue of how much is actually collected by private collect. By definition, it's a private arrangement, but we're hoping through that survey we'll get a bit of a sense of what is the lived experience of people in terms of actually receiving the amounts and what debts are actually being accrued through the private collect
yes,
component.
I think you won't like what you find.
Well, we'll wait to see the results, and it's important work to help properly inform that with an evidence base.
And just lastly, on that very point, and you gave some figures to Senator Little before about child support debts, but it wasn't clear to me whether that was the agency collect half or the private collect half. So do you have, so the 1.83, the 1.47 and the 1.69 billion, presumably that was the agency collect debts that you've quantified. And I'm after, do you have any kind of way of estimating the amount of debt owed to the 500,000 kids that are covered by private collect?
Yeah, I can't add to what I just said, which is we don't have a way of doing that because we're not actually investigating people who've elected to do a private collect arrangement.
Okay, and with the 10 seconds we've got left, could you give me those figures, please, on the lodgement enforcement program for unfolded?
Oh, now I'm going to have to find it, sorry.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Chair. I'm done after that.
No pressure, mate. So, 23-24, 161,997 child support parents with one or more outstanding tax lodgements were referred to the ATO for lodgement compliance.
Okay. Can you, on notice, just let me know what that looks like? Like, what does the ATO then do?
Sure,
Do they just get a scary letter that they ignore, or is there some kind of sequence of actions? Thank you.
We'll come back to you.
Great,
Thanks, Senator Waters. Coming to Senator Kovacic to take us up to the tea break.
Thank you. Mine relates to some quants from the last round of estimates. I submitted 38 questions on notice requesting details of funding across forward estimates for programs and grants in social services, and each question I asked for funding that was allocated, unallocated, contracted or uncontracted, and I was referred to in the answers to tenders.gov.au and to grants.gov.au and the social services portfolio budget statement, even though none of the information that I sought was available at any of those locations. So I'm trying to understand if somebody can guide me. For example, perhaps, Secretary, if you can show me the page in the PBS where, for example, funding for autism spectrum disorder playgroups, as an example, for the forward estimates can be found, because I couldn't find it in any of those locations.
Senator Pat Etherington, Chief Operating Officer. We're able to give you a bit more of that breakdown now, if that would be helpful. As you know, the portfolio budget statements provide a summary level, and the Chief Finance Officer is in a position to give you some more detail.
Sure. So I've got like 4 that I wanted across, but I was just curious why it wasn't in the locations that I was directed to.
I'd have to go back and check the responses to those quants. I suppose in a general sense, when we draft quants, the quants that are tabled do try to direct you to helpful information, and you'll see that, as you know, we've provided operational data on the department for your access on our website, and we update that regularly. I can go back and look at those quants, but as I said, we're in a position to give you some of that data now.
Thank you. I'll pop those on notice. So the ones I was after was autism spectrum disorder playgroups, boosting the local care workforce, and early childhood targeted action plan.
So part of the issue with the challenge in responding to those quants was it goes to a significant level of detail that we don't generally track or report in our budget documents, but we do track it at levels like the employment services program in our budget, and we can talk you through the budget we've got available, what's already committed and the available budget left at that sort of level, but not down to that much lower level that you've just requested.
Okay, so that's not available at all at that lower level?
It's not something we generally report or... So would you like me to give you an example, say employment services?
Yeah, sure. Yep. And then I was going to say perhaps you can table that document. That might be simpler for all of us.
Okay,
we've got like 5 minutes.
So employment services has a budget of $1,329 million. We've spent $309 million of that year to date, and we have commitments of $1,018 million, leaving an available budget so uncommitted of 1,412,000.
Okay. And then just more broadly, and if you could table that document if it covers those other areas, where exactly on those websites are the details of those allocated and unallocated?
So the budget, so the budget column, it's primarily the budget column which is in the PBS. Some of this other information is additional that we can provide you now.
Okay, so it's not on those links that were.
We can check the links, but I mean, if you've been there and haven't seen them, then I assume that that's the case.
Okay, thank you. If you could pop that on notice and the other information as well. And just a final question, and I can finish up with that then, Chair, given my questions all relate to that. Did the Minister's Office have any involvement in the approval of the answers to those quants?
I think in this forum I've walked through in some detail our process for responding to quans from memory.
These ones specifically given
well, the minister clears all of our quans before they're tabled, so we will develop responses to quans. We provide those to the minister's office, and ultimately, what is tabled is the response that has been approved by the minister.
Are there any circumstances where specific answers are walked back to generic locations, like what's happened in these series of 38 quans?
I would say, in general terms, it is fair to say that not all of the responses that we draft are the responses that are tabled. Sometimes they seek additional information, sometimes they change those responses in order to provide links or direct you to publicly available information. Given the volume of questions on notice that we've had, it's been necessary for us to do some of that as well, which is why I've adopted the practice of trying to put as much as we can on our website and direct you to that. Simply because the volume is quite a lot to get through.
And I'll put forward the list on notice of those 38 quans as well, but would I be able to ask you for the original answers to those quans?
I'll take it on notice. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator Kovacic. We'll just move to a tea break now for 15 minutes, and we will require officials back with us after the break from these outcomes, but we don't anticipate that will be for long before we move to the final part of the program. Thank you very much. And Senator Orman-Payne has the call.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to do my very best to try and keep this as tight as possible. I want to go to key activity 1.4.1, disability support pension. And I'm noting that the target says at least 90% of people with a profound or severe disability of working age are supported by the disability support pension. I note that the result for 2023 is 68.5%. I'm just wondering if the department has any reflections on that number.
Senator, I mean, we obviously pay close attention to all our key performance indicators. I think it's less an issue of the KPI itself and whether the overall settings for DSP remain appropriate. What we have seen over the most recent period has been an increasing number of people coming onto that payment. So at the last observation, which was at the end of September, there was 805,715 people on that payment, and that's up from 776,000. So, you know, we look closely at people who are applying, how many people are being knocked back as part of those process, and overall settings in terms of ability for people to come onto payment and potentially engage with work and then resume payment. So there's a range of different settings that are probably more significant for us than just that percentage figure.
All right. I mean, I note there was some stuff in there about changes in the way that the ABS gathered some of that data, more people being, what's the word? I'm sorry, it's late. You know, more people being aware of disability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess it clearly reflects an increasing need in the community. So I'm interested to know in the steps that the department is taking to manage the fact that this is clearly a growing area of need.
So we look at all aspects of the policy. You're probably aware that there were changes implemented to the impairment table. So the impairment tables are the key instruments used for qualification. There were a number of changes made to that in order to make it easier for people in terms of assessing their eligibility. So, for instance, no longer a requirement to see a registered psychologist for people with a mental illness, you know, those sorts of things. But in conjunction with Service Australia, from a service delivery perspective in the policy settings, we're always looking at ways to ensure that it remains an effective and targeted payment.
Mm-hmm. Turning to job seeker, I guess, because the two are linked, because I note that just over 40% of job seeker recipients have a partial capacity to work of under 30 hours a week. Would you say this reflects a disconnect between the purposes of job seeker and the DSP, in the sense that we clearly have these large gaps of, like, we have lots of people on job seeker who actually have disability, and we also have this massive unmet need on DSP?
I don't know that I'd say unmet need. I think we remain interested in whether there's any blockages, particularly for the category of people who have a low partial capacity to work. So, yes, it's 0 to 30 to 15 hours, 15 to 30 hours, and kind of looking at, particularly for those people who have a very limited ability to work, are some of those people should some of those people be going on to DSP? Of course, it's the case that some of those people will be applying, and so sometimes that'll just sort of work through the system. But I mean, they are still fundamentally different payments in their purpose. You know, people on job seeker assessed as being able to work. People on DSP have met different requirements in terms of their impairment and their ability to undertake work. So.
Okay. Has the department done any modelling or considered the conditions of access to the DSP in light of the high number of people that are on job seeker with a partial capacity to work?
I'm not sure, though, what you mean in terms of what sort of things specifically are you suggesting or asking about in terms of whether we've done any work?
Well, I guess, have you modelled or analysed the increase in the number of people on a partial capacity with a view to then considering whether in fact there need to be changes to the DSP? And I'm particularly thinking those people have very low capacity to work. I mean, in many instances it's very hard for those people to find a job where someone's going to employ them for 10 hours a week, and often that can be sporadic as well. So I guess, given that we have 40% of people with a disability on JobSeeker? Have you done any modelling to look at whether, in fact, changes to the DSP might actually be a better way of dealing with that cohort of people?
I think that we remain of the view that the DSP settings remain appropriate. I mean, they're ultimately, obviously, instruments of Parliament, both in terms of the legislation and those impairment tables instrument. I think there's different ways to come at that. Part of it is that service delivery issue or application issue. Are there barriers to people who should be testing their eligibility but are finding it difficult? That's a separate set of issues, obviously, about the way the health system interacts with the system. But I go back to what I said earlier. They are different payments, and I guess for that, while there is an increasing number of people on JobSeeker payment with a partial capacity to work, they still have some work capacity. And I think the bigger issue then is really about the ability of the Disability Employment Service and employment service providers generally to actually find tailored opportunities for those people to build their skills and to go into employment, for many of whom will be on a part-time basis.
I know you said earlier that there's people experiencing blockages to access the DSP. If this is an increasing cohort, what steps are being taken to remove some of those blockages?
So some of those changes on the impairment tables, but to be honest, some of them sit outside the remit of the system because they go to issues like the ability for people to see a bulk doctor. So other changes the government's made in terms of Medicare assist people generally, but also have a benefit for people who might otherwise face significant costs in collating the medical evidence. Our engagement with stakeholders is also quite relevant to understanding the pathways that people go through. And obviously there's particular challenges for people in rural remote areas in terms of access to medical specialists and professionals in a way that is still an issue, but to a lesser extent for people in urban areas.
And these things that you're talking about, for how long has the department been implementing those measures to assist people? Is that something that's like very recent, has been happening over the last 12 months?
I think over a much longer period. You know, we engage with stakeholders, we try and understand what the concerns are, we work out, are there ways, in terms of the assessment process itself, in terms of the evidence required, are there ways to limit that burden? It is, I think, still the payment that requires the most of any applicants in terms of the evidence that needs to be provided, and so therefore we do pay particular attention to ensuring that burden is not too great. But at the same time, there's a need to ensure there's a fair system, and the impairment tables are a way of ensuring that there's an objective way of assessing need. So,
given that then you've said those things have happened over a period of time, a fairly long period of time, but the result is 68.5% and the outcome hasn't been met, are you looking at reviewing and changing what you're doing? Because clearly it's not getting the required number of people up to that 90% target.
I mean, to go back to what you said earlier, part of the reason why the target wasn't met is because when the ABS released its latest survey of disability, or ESTAC as it's known, there was a substantial increase in the number of people reporting with a disability. That's been a relatively recent thing, so that hasn't necessarily been a long-term structural thing. It's actually just been a step change in the last ABS collection. So we will continue to look at that and obviously give advice to government in terms of the policy settings and the service delivery settings to make sure they remain appropriate.
Okay. I want to go to... What do I want to go to? Centre pay. I'm just wondering if you can provide an update on the work to reform the centre pay system so that it isn't so it's no longer able to be used by big corporations to steal money from people on income support payments, given that we know this has been a significant problem.
That'll be outcome 2, Senator, I think. I think our outcome 2 team can talk to that.
Okay. All right, well, in that case, can I just quickly circle back? Sorry, I just need to find where I put it. Yep, so I know that Services Australia has gone in relation to income apportionment. I just had a couple of questions I wanted to circle back on, but they're to you, Mr Griggs and Council. So just in relation to, you mentioned that you're in fairly regular contact with the Ombudsman. I just want to clearly understand when it was that you let the Ombudsman know that it was likely that the income apportionment issues actually went much further than 2003 and as far back as the 1990s. Is that only recent? Because the Ombudsman's report talks about at least 2003, so I'm just wondering when you alerted them to the change.
I don't have that exact date. I'll take that on notice. I think, unless you have it, Bronwyn. No, we'll take it on notice. Senator.
All right, thank you. And I just had one other question then in relation to the CDPP. Yep. Ms Walswick, you mentioned that they've sort of cleared everything, and I think you talked about the fact that, you know, it's up to defendants to appeal now.
Sorry, Senator, the CDPP advised us they consider they've fulfilled their disclosure obligations.
Yes, all right, because I guess my question was, clearly there could be instances where people have been prosecuted and that's now based on something that's been unlawful, noting that the majority of those people potentially who fall into that category are potentially vulnerable, don't have necessarily the resources or the wherewithal to go through an appeals process. I'm just wanting to know whether it's the view of the department and the CDPP that there's nothing left for them to do, or there's actually proactive steps to be taken around those people who may be in that situation.
Well, Senator, I'm not sure if you've heard this evidence previously, but what we do know is that when the CDPP became aware, when we advised them of the situation, they wrote to all individuals identified by Services Australia who had active orders, and then they also contacted all legal aid agencies. Various states are involved in relation to these matters, and asked them to communicate with individuals who were on their books, so to speak, who are affected. So they've done that. And what has been happening since is they've been regularly advising us of whether they've heard or been in receipt of any correspondence from legal aid agencies on behalf of those individuals. But the CDPP's view is that they've met their disclosure obligations. There's nothing more left for them to do now. They have, and as I said in my evidence earlier, no individual or no legal aid has brought to their attention a notice of any appeal by an individual seeking to have their conviction set aside.
All right, thank you. That's cleared up my understanding of what you meant by that.
And if I could just add, the meeting that we had just recently, I think last week, we met with a number of agencies, and included in the meeting attendees were representatives of Victorian Legal Aid, New South Legal Aid, and they asked these same questions, and we continue to update them as we...
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm done, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Ormond-Payne. With the committee's agreement, that does conclude our questions for outcome 1 and the whole of portfolio on corporate matters for DSS. So we'll now be moving to outcome 2. With gratitude and apologies, but perhaps appreciation, we can let go the Australian Institute of Family Studies. So there's the senators who called you no longer have questions for you this evening, so you are free to depart.
Thanks, Chair. Could I just clarify? Centrepay is actually exclusively Services Australia.
Not outcome 2.
We don't have any. No, we don't have any. We don't have any policy responsibility on Centrepay.
It was this morning.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'll have to put them on notice. Thank you.
I can give you an update on it.
You in charge.
You guys coordinate your cons, because I asked Louise to put hers on notice. All right, we are at outcome 2, and we are only 18 minutes behind now, which is a
amazing work, Chair.
dramatic catch up. All right, so we will deal in this section. I appreciate that we have the Commission here as well. Senators, how would you like to manage this? Do you want to put the questions to the Commissioner first or last, or we normally just don't do these ones interchangeably? Normally she has an opening statement. Does she have an opening? Yeah, she's have an opening statement. Oh, okay, yes, then we can deal with them concurrently. Yes. Okay. I will pass the call in the first instance to the opposition.
Thank you.
Senator Little.
Thank you. I'd like to ask first some questions about the first action plan. Can you help us with that? Thank you. So how much money is unallocated under the first action plan as of this date?
Gingerella, Letitia Hope, Deputy Secretary, Families and Communities. Senator, can I just clarify, when you say the first action plan, do you mean
I mean the current action plan.
For ending gender-based violence?
Sorry, yes.
I have many action plans.
Right, okay, it's that one.
Thanks, Senator.
And outcome 2. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms Anna Lutz, Group Manager Ending Gender-Based Violence. I can confirm what's been allocated under the first action plan. So it's 13.89 million in total, and there are 5 activities. The National FDSV Workforce Survey, 1.75 million. Developing Healthy Masculinities, 4.08. National FDSV Training for Faith Leaders, 3.96. National FDSV Workforce Education on Elder Abuse, 1.18. And Activity 5, responding to the DRC recommendations, Disability Royal Commission, apologies, 2.33.
So that's 13.9 million allocated. What was the plan expectation at this point in time?
I should also add there's an evaluation procurement that's included in that. Yep. I would have to check what... I would have to check on that. That's I know what was allocated and what we've got here.
Where you were expecting to be.
Yes.
Right. I understand there was a review into the program objectives and outcomes of all the grants funded under the previous national plan. Are you able to provide a copy of that review?
Senator, I would need to check what we can provide. There was an internal review of all grants done as natural, as they were coming to a natural end under the previous national plan. So I would need to check what we've got available to provide. But it was an internal review of grants.
Mm-hmm. So the fourth component of the first action plan is recovery and healing. And we know that previous exposure is a key risk factor to future violence. What is currently being done in the recovery space to ensure issues of recidivism is addressed?
Senator, I've got a table where I can pull up the recovery. Just give me a moment.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can come back to that question.
Okay. And if you can include in that table the number of programs that actually sit under recovery and healing?
Yes. Would you like us to take that on notice? I can provide that on notice.
If you could provide it tonight, that would be great.
Okay.
I'm also interested to understand how many of those programs that sit under there are actually on schedule. I want to talk about the funding agreement for family, domestic and sexual violence responses. Point 40 on there says, as provided for under Clause 21 of the Federation Funding Agreement, affordable housing, community services and other parties must ensure prior agreement is reached on the nature and content of any events, announcements, promotional material or publicity relating to activities under this schedule. Is that a new clause? Or has that been around for quite some time?
Clause 40 in the current, I would have to track back to what changes happened under the initial National Partnership Agreement, if that's what you're referencing.
I've got a copy. I've got the clauses. Yep. I've got them here, but if you can have a look at that. My read of that clause suggests that looks like a gag order to me, that nobody who receives money under this national plan can speak out. Would that be a fair assessment of the use of those words or the potential use of those words?
I would have to check the exact wording of the clause. I think we'd take that one on notice to confirm. The intent of the National Partnership, though, Senator, is to work in partnership with states and territories. in terms of delivering the outcomes under that partnership agreement. So there's also the sort of, those clauses exist within the intent of how that partnership agreement operates.
Okay. So on October the 10th, the Senate agreed to an order of the production of documents relating to gag orders in DSS funding agreements. And on October the 16th, I received correspondence, and I'm happy to table it if that's required, that the documents would be made available before today, the 6th of November. Those documents have not been made available to the Senate. Is the government and the department preventing information on the existence of those gag orders, given that was an order of the Senate to produce those documents? And I'm happy to provide the actual letters from the Minister. There's no explanation as to why that information is not provided. Are you able to provide an explanation?
Oh, I can certainly say, Senator, that the department's not being obstructive in terms of information. Senator, are you referring to a quan? Sorry, just can you...
No, I'm referring to a instruction of the Senate to provide documents on whether there are effectively gag orders, and this doesn't give any explanation as to the reason why that couldn't be provided by this date. Is it has the department provided the information?
Senator Pat Hetherington, Chief Operating Officer. I'm going from memory on the exact terms of the order. I understood it to be in relation to non-disclosure agreements around consultation. And I think in that letter we described that we were unable to provide documents in the time frame. Part of the reason for that is that we don't actually centrally record confidentiality agreements in relation to consultation processes. So I can talk to that a little bit. Now, if you give me one moment. So, in the first instance, I'd say I think there was some confusion about there's a difference between non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements. Non-disclosure agreements, of which we as a department have very few, as I understand it, sort of specific legal instruments used to protect specific types of information, such as trade secrets and financial data. My memory of that particular order was about consultation processes. We do use confidentiality agreements in that context, and we do that for a number of very good reasons, usually to protect sensitive information for both us and people that engage in consultation. What I've been able to pull together for today is a summary level of where we have used confidentiality agreements. If it would be helpful, I can list some of those for you.
So why wasn't some of that provided as part of this order?
We have now actually, just in the last day or so, provided a brief which will arrive in due course that will provide some of this information.
But the date on here says that it will be provided, the Minister actually says it will be provided by the 10th of October, and now we've got a commitment here that there will be tabling by 5 p.m. Wednesday, 16th of October. We still don't have the documents. We were told that the correspondence would be available by the 6th of November, and now you tell me you've actually got some information.
So the order requested that the information be provided by the 16th of October. The response that you received said that the advice was that not be in a position to provide information in the response to the order before the 6th of November 2024. So that was the time frame, before the 6th of November 2024. Yep. So, as I said, I have some of that information with me now, if you'd like me to walk through some of those in terms of...
The key word being before the 6th of November.
It would not be provided before the 6th of November. We will not be in a position to provide the information in response to the order before 6 November 2024.
So you were expecting to come today and give me that information?
Well, I have some in front of me now.
Right. So what does your information... Are you able to table what you've got there?
Not in its current format, but I think what you'll get when that order is responded to is effectively this information. As I said, I can provide you that now.
Okay, tell me what's in the document if you're not prepared to actually provide it and table it.
Sure. So use of confidentiality agreements in consultation activities, and I can walk through. It's a reasonable list. We have used them in the Consent Can't Wait campaign expert advisory group. The number of stakeholders where we did that was 15 in that instance. Volunteering Awareness Campaign Expert Advisory Group, 6. Stop It at the Start Campaign, 8. National Autism Strategy Oversight Council and Working Groups, quite a number. Greater than 11 is the advice I have here. I don't know the exact number on that. The National Disability Insurance Scheme Market Safeguards, NDIS Reform, Workforce Pricing and Payments, 30. Child Support Expert Panel and Child Support Consultation Stakeholder Group, 19.
Mr Hetherington, are they the same clauses in all of those agreements?
Well, they're confidentiality agreements. I don't have the exact clauses for each of those in front of me, but we could.
We've got a whole lot of stuff here. Can you not provide it? I mean, if they're effectively orders to make sure that people are not able to talk about things, I would.
Well, I wouldn't. So, as I said before, there is a difference between a non-disclosure agreement and a confidentiality agreement. And you've characterised it as though we're ordering people not to...
But you're not showing me it, so how would I know that?
Okay, well, I've just finished my point. You're characterising it as though we're ordering people not to disclose information. The purpose of these is to safeguard individuals' information. Appreciate that when we do consultation of this nature, sometimes people are sharing personal information. It's important that they trust that we won't release that, or that, indeed that anybody else involved in those consultation processes will release that.
So just to be clear, you will provide those clauses?
Yeah, I will have a look on those.
By when?
Senator, it's Bronwyn Morswick, Chief Counsel. I can give you, we could table a copy of the template that we use for these types of consultation arrangements, if that would be helpful.
Yep, that would be fine if you can table that now.
Yes, if I can just find a printer.
We'll take some moment.
Fine.
Yes.
Okay. So how many times would you have used those agreements, or does that just sit there and...
well, as I was saying, I was walking through that list when I talked about the number of stakeholders involved. We would have asked those stakeholders to enter into that arrangement. I can tally up the total number, but it looks like 20, 30, 60... based on the list I have in front of me, in excess of 100 times, but not for over 100 activities. For a set of activities, each individual stakeholder would have been asked to enter into an agreement. Is that right? Is that a correct characterisation of that?
Yes. Senator, the important point though is that these confidentiality agreements aren't what you may have heard characterised as non-disclosure NDAs. That has attracted media attention recently. Most of these agreements are in circumstances where individuals are being invited to share their personal information and lived experience as part of our consultation arrangements. That perspective is really important to inform how we go about formulating our policies, etc. And what we ask is that the participants in those groups feel that they are able to participate freely and share that information, but that collectively that there's a commitment that that information isn't then exchanged or shared outside of that context, and that the important policy ramifications of those consultations are then used by the department in the work we do. So they're not the NDAs that you may have heard referred to in the media as being sort of a draconian, onerous, threatening type of instrument. They're actually very much about promoting honest and meaningful participation in our consultation processes that protects the individual but also protects the department in the processes it's fulfilling.
Senator, we are due to rotate shortly. I just want to get a sense of how much more you have on this line of questioning. Come back to you all. If there's only a couple more, we'll just finish it off.
Yeah, I just want clarity that we're going to get that information tonight. That's right, because that's 14 days from the actual request, and you've brought the information.
Yeah, as I said before, I mean, in terms of the time frame that was requested, It is simply that we, in order to try and pull this information together, we haven't recorded centrally this data, and so it's taken us a bit of time to get it together, and hopefully you found that useful.
Thank you. So, am I in a position to rotate now?
Yes, I'll go back to the...
Yeah, okay, thank you. Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've also got some questions for the Family, Domestic and Sexual Violence Commissioner, Commissioner Cronin. So I'm not sure, Chair, what the protocol is, but
yes,
if you'd like to join us at the table. Excuse me. Thank you. They're not all for you, but there's some for you. Thank you. Can I start off, though, with the department? I understand that the government is doing a governance review of the national plan to end violence against women and children. Who's doing that? When did it start? When will it finish? And what's in scope?
Senator, thank you for the question. Yes, we are doing a governance review of the national plan governance arrangements as they currently exist. That it's we are a year and a half into the action plan, so it's timely to review those arrangements. They were set up to help develop the policy framework and the action plan, so we're looking at that in a different phase. The department is undertaking that review with some external assistance. I'd have to confirm who that is on notice for you. And our time frame is we'll do a first phase that includes consulting with existing governance arrangements and members over the next number of months into early 2025.
Sorry, just the first phase going into early 2025?
Yes, which is talking to existing consultation.
And what comes after that?
Mechanisms, and then we'll move into a recommendation phase for next steps.
And the timeframes on that?
I would need to confirm. I might just ask Mr Crozier to join to confirm the time frame for that.
And perhaps while you're joining us, can you be a little more specific about what governance aspects are being reviewed?
So under the current arrangements, we have a National Plan Advisory Group, we have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Action Plan Advisory Council. We also have multiple layers of state and territory governance. That is, and that's set out in our action plan document. So it's those arrangements that we're reviewing. They also predate the establishment of the Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Commission and Commissioner. So important part of the governance review is to actually look at the Lived Experience Advisory Council and bring that in formally to the governance arrangements. We absolutely work with the Commission now, and the Commissioner's on our on the National Plan Advisory Group and other governance mechanisms, but Senator, it's an opportunity to make sure that's formalised.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator, if I can just add to that, as you'll be aware, there's also the First Nations Standalone Action Plan, and we're currently doing the First Nations Standalone Plan. They're two different governance structures. We're expecting the First Nations Standalone Plan to land in June 25, and what we really want to do is make sure that it is very complicated governance. We can certainly table a schema of that for you. We do want to make sure that we are harmonising all of these various different advisory committees and steering committees and ensuring that we have captured the full picture.
Sorry, when you say harmonise, you mean you'll blend them in future, or
potentially? When the governance, so the advisory council that was set up to do the First Nations action plan is still currently
looking on
that plan and making sure that that's being delivered. Yep. The First Nations Steering Committee is doing the work to develop the standalone plan. So there's a lot of moving governance parts, and as Ms Lutz said, it is about making sure that we look at this a year and a half in, make sure that we've got the Commissioner at the table and the Lived Experience Advisory Council at the table, and look at the governance as a whole.
Yes, okay. So the standalone First Nations plan, was that the June 2025 date you mentioned?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And is SNAIC still doing the Secretariat work for that? And if so, what funding do they get to do that?
So SNAIC are doing the Secretariat work for the standalone plan. The funding, I'm sure Ms Lutz has got the funding there.
Senator, could I just clarify, your question was how much is SNAIC being funded?
It's the Secretariat.
Yes, the Secretariat.
I do have it, Senator.
I will come back.
They do other things, but just for that function. Thank you. And I think we called you up to the table for I can't read my own writing. Please tell us what you were going to tell us before.
He was going to talk about the time frame for the governance review.
Thank you. That was it. Well done.
Welcome.
Thank you. Tim Crozier, Branch Manager, National Policy. So the time frame commenced in September. It was just coming back to one of the other questions. It's Nous Consulting who is working with the department. So it's Nous Consulting who's working with the department in terms of undertaking that.
Nous Consulting.
Nous, a consulting.
I've never heard of them. What background have they got that makes them experts?
Small, medium consulting firm with a pretty...
Do they know anything about family violence? I have never heard of them before.
They do have expertise across a range of different social policy areas, including family, domestic and sexual violence.
Okay. Perhaps on notice, could you provide for me, like, who else was under consideration for getting that tender? Presumably there was some kind of process to select them.
That's right.
So what were the criteria that you used and who were the other contenders? Thank you. And also how much is that consultation costing?
Yep.
Thank you for the details on the First Nations standalone plan. I note that the House inquiry from 2021 recommended that the Commissioner role be established, but also that it should be an independent statutory body, and that status was also recommended by the Rapid Review recently. Has the department been asked to do any work on making Ms Cronin's Commissioner role an independent statutory role?
No, Senator, I don't believe we have done that. So no, I don't believe there's any active work happening on making it a statutory independent role, as you...
Okay. So given there's two different bodies that have now suggested that, what do they just get... Like, does someone not think about those suggestions and make a recommendation and somebody does something about it?
No. Oh, sorry, Secretary.
It's a matter for government.
Yeah, as the Secretary said, it is a matter for government, but we're not actively looking at that work at this point in time.
Okay. Well, could I, Minister, perhaps that's one for you. Could I ask whether the government is in fact considering those two recommendations that came from the House inquiry and that also were reinforced by the recent Rapid Review to make the status of the Commissioner an independent statutory body? Is that on anybody's list to think on?
As you appreciate, this is not my portfolio, but I shall make contact with the Minister and come back to you with her thoughts on this topic.
Thanks very much. And Commissioner, since we're talking about you, what's your view on that? I have some other questions for you, but is that a recommendation that you support or oppose?
Just noting we're kind of getting close to the personal opinion. So
in any way that doesn't reflect your personal opinion?
You're not required to provide a personal opinion, Ms Cronin.
Okay. Can you run us through the advantages of making the office that you currently hold a statutory independent body?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Michaela Cronin, Commissioner, Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence. You've noted that's been recommended a number of times. I think the Commission was established 2 years ago, and we have been developing what the functions are. One of the areas that I have discussed with there are only two other commissioners similar to this in the world. One of them is in the UK. One of the things that the commissioner there has talked about is powers to request information and reporting. I think that that in future might be a useful thing for government to look into. However, there has not been any limitations in terms of my capacity to undertake the tasks that the Commission has been commissioned with by government to date within the capacity that we have.
Okay. Well, just on that point, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because there's obviously a lot happening in this space, but my understanding of one of the reasons for establishing the Commission was to have some level of scrutiny over the funding pipeline, and I have some more detailed questions to the department about that and how we can fix that transparency. But I thought that had been tasked to the Commission to kind of work out where the money was going and where various blockages were, to have some kind of transparency piece there. Is that, A, is that not the case? And B, if that is the case, would not those information request and reporting powers actually be quite useful to compel that information from maybe other levels of government that might not be so forthcoming?
Senator, that's not that level of detail in terms of the Commission's function has not been tasked with us. So no, we haven't been specifically tasked around transparency around funding. What the Commission has been tasked with is monitoring of the overall impact and implementation of the national plan. And we have made recommendations around the need for transparency around funding, and for that was an issue that we raised in the yearly report to Parliament. But in fact, the Commission's view is that potentially that's something that government could look at the Productivity Commission doing rather than us. So it's not necessarily something the Commission itself. It's more something we have raised as an important thing for there to be oversight of.
Okay, thank you. Well, perhaps I'll ask the department then, will there be any work, is there any work underway, or will there be any work underway to increase that transparency of funding that goes to the states and territories pursuant to the national plan through the National Partnership Agreement? Because it's really hard to work out what's going where.
Senator, yes. So part of the 6th of September National Cabinet announcement, the communique indicated an agreement, a renewed 5-year agreement with increased transparency and accountability. I can't give you any more details about that. It's currently actively being progressed, so I can't provide more details about what that looks like today. Also, in the context of the broader national plan, we have the outcomes framework and the performance measurement plan, which is a commitment from the Commonwealth and all states and territories to continue to improve data and reporting.
What was the name of that one, sorry?
The outcomes framework and the performance measurement plan, which looks at improving data and the gaps in data to report against outcomes.
Oh, yes. Is this the one I've asked about for the last 4 years, and the timeframe keeps getting pushed back on measuring unmet need in frontline services that AIHW has been tasked with?
That's a specific project, but the outcomes framework and the performance measurement plan is our data framework. So the performance measurement plan has, I think, has 4 tiers of data measures in it, and it identifies data gaps, and you can find that on our website.
Okay, thank you. I will take
the link. But that really sets out the kind of underpinning data framework and commitment to improving data. The AIHW project that you've asked about previously, and we talked about at last estimates, is a specific project, and there are specific data improvement projects that we're working on with states and territories like the AIHW.
Thank you. On notice, because I think I'm getting the wind up, could you give me a bit more detail on the progress of that AIHW task? And lastly, have you asked the Productivity Commission to do the work that the Commissioner has recommended in her yearly report to Parliament about improving transparency of those funding pipelines?
I haven't asked I'm aware of that in conversations with the Commissioner. I am not aware that we've asked yet.
Okay. Minister, perhaps could you take that on under advisement as well? Is the government actively considering that recommendation from the Commissioner to have the PC look at transparency of funding pipelines?
I certainly will, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator, just to answer your question on the funding for SNAKE for Secretariat for the First Nations standalone plan, the Secretariat, the procurement's the 22nd of the 12th, 2023 to the 30th of the 6th, 25, and the money is $3,180,961.63.
Thanks very
Thank you.
much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Come back to me
Intuitive Centre Waters. No, that's okay. I'm coming back to Senator Little now, and then I'll return the call to the Greens.
I'd like to go back to the issue of confidentiality agreements. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hetherington. Can you tell me the confidentiality agreements that relate to the list that you sort of read out before, is that different to the agreements that actually sit in relation to the frontline workers and the other initiative in terms of men's programs?
Senator, it may well be. I'm not actually familiar with the clauses you're referring to in terms of frontline workers and men's programs.
I'm just trying to understand if there's any different clauses that apply to the programs that sit in the innovative perpetrator responses for the frontline workers to those ones that you actually referred to before.
Thanks, Senator. Maybe just stay up here.
Sorry, Senator.
I told you to go and sit down.
I might just ask Ms Purdy to join me, please, and talk about innovative perpetrators. Senator, yes, to answer your question, there are some specific requirements for innovative perpetrators.
So are you able to tell me why those are that's different to the others?
I think, so the head agreement is the same, but the schedule requirements will differ for each program of work. So there's requirements in there about what we mean by innovative perpetrator responses. So it's specifically to the requirements for that.
Now, the explanation that was provided earlier, I understood that to be around protecting the confidentiality of individuals, the content of negotiations, but this one, in this agreement that I have here, if I need to, I'm sure you're familiar with them, but I'm happy to actually table them as well. This is clause 40 relating to media and publicity, which is very clear about the nature and content of material.
So, Senator, that's the general clause in the MPA that applies to the broader National Partnership Agreement. To the states and territories. So the parties to the National Partnership Agreement are the states and territories in this case, which is set out in the top of the MPA schedule. So the innovative perpetrators and 500 workers sits within the broader clauses of the National Partnership Agreement, and that applies to all. In those cases, those clauses would apply to the broader agreement. Those clauses, as I understand it, will be consistent with, so this sits under the requirements for these partnerships, which are a set of whole of government requirements, so they would sit under the...
So what you're saying is this binds the states and territories, not the people who are getting the funding either through the states and territories or directly from you?
So, just to clarify, the clause applies to the parties, and in this case, the parties are states and territories.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I think I am waiting for that documentation, but I'm happy to move on to a question in relation to income management.
Sure, Senator. I'll just ask the other officers to come to the table. That is not Ms Lutz. She'll be back.
Yeah, good. Good. Thank you.
Yes, Senator, we have the officers at the table.
Thank you. So there is much evidence that prevention and early intervention are key, and would you agree that that proposition is not only supported by the evidence, but by the Albanese government, the DSS, and indeed the sector?
Senator,
that prevention and early intervention is key to addressing...
I think that's a proposition, Senator.
Right.
I wouldn't proffer my opinion on it, but it's a known
the
proposition.
Evidence, right. Okay, so have you done any work at all on preparing for the removal of income management? Have you been asked to do any work on preparing for the removal of income management?
Yes, Senator Patrick Burford, Group Manager of Communities. We are in the process of entering the third stage of consultation, seeking advice from communities and key stakeholders regarding the future of income management, including the sort of supports communities need, not only in any transition from a compulsory broad-based model to a voluntary model, but also in broader sense about financial skills and financial supports to help folk manage their money. And so those consultations continue. We're moving into the third stage of those. The second stage was the largest phase with over 4,000 people across the Northern Territory interviewed and consulted with regarding their views on income management, but also what other supports they are seeking. And that certainly goes to things like preventative supports and supports regarding their financial literacy and capabilities has been one of the common themes. We've moved into the communities had asked us to make sure we loop back to them into this third stage, which I have a couple of teams out, one at West Arnhem at the moment, another team in Tiwi Islands. I'll be out at Wadeye next week to continue some further conversations about what transitional arrangements might be essential for folk, with a really important, I guess, message coming from the consultation about the care needed in any transitional arrangements.
We saw the communities that wanted the cashless debit card experienced the consequences of its removal. Are you doing your consultation differently? Because you refer to key communities. How are you doing consultation differently to what was done with the removal of the cashless debit card in terms of the mandatory cashless debit card in those communities that wanted it?
We've continued to engage with cashless debit card communities since the announcement to abolish the cashless debit card. There's been over 432 engagements with those communities. In the lead up, there was preparatory work about the supports needed to help people, support people coming off the card. So around 16,000 people were supported to come off this cashless debit card, and that included people who were going to completely come off, some people that were going to volunteer to stay on the new enhanced income management program, and also around 4,000 participants in the Northern Territory that would move directly onto enhanced income management. The discussions continue with those communities about the support services still required. We've invested close to $130 million in those sites, reflecting the needs of those communities as part of the support structure regarding the removal of the cashless debit card. The consultation for income management is a second phase of the government's commitment. The government committed to getting rid of the cashless debit card. That process that I described in terms of the engagement and the consultation about what supports were needed has occurred, and the support services still flow there. Income management obviously will have a large focus on the Northern Territory, given the large majority of people on income management are in the Northern Territory, and that has a series of questions talking about what would be the transitional requirements and supports required, what people's views on income management are, and we have plenty of feedback from those consultations that there are some people that would choose to stay on income management if given the choice. They are ensuring that we want to have proper financial supports as people come off the card. The difference is there, Senator, is that with the removal of the cashless debit card, there was an option given for people to volunteer. The income management also will have will be a voluntary model as well, but we're talking to communities about what was the nature of how people are supported to make those choices and also move on to it.
So I'm just trying to understand, given DSS deals with a whole heap of issues from payments to people who are disadvantaged, trying to find employment, working through domestic and family violence, and we know the incidence of domestic and family violence increased in those communities. How is it possible to, at the same time as removing those programs, continue to pour money into prevention and early intervention when restricting access to gambling, drinking and drugs through the use of cash was actually a prevention initiative? How much more money, how much more human cost does there need to be to address the consequences that we saw with the removal of the cashless debit card?
There were two evaluations done of the cashless debit card when in play. and there was no clear, strong evidence that they were having the impacts you've just described, Senator. Likewise, the removal of the card has not, and the University of Adelaide review into the removal of the card did not point to a clear causal link between any observed social impacts and the removal of the card. Same goes with the analysis of the empirical data from South Australian, Western Australian crime data being able to cause any causal link. In fact, the University of Adelaide report went to great lengths to qualify the variable nature of crime data, and the multiple drivers for those sort of outcomes makes it very hard and high risk to assign a particular policy setting to those outcomes.
Right, I'm going to go to the University of Adelaide report and the communication that was revealed under Freedom of Information requests about changes to the wording, the draft wording of that report, that looked like it was asking for requests to change the outcomes that the university found in relation to its work. Let me explain that to you. Throughout the report, there were word changes where people had actually stated their experiences. Right throughout the report, it's changed to, well, they perceived, he perceived, throughout the report. Who directed those changes were made to the voices of people who gave evidence to the University of Adelaide as part of that evaluation? Was it the department or was it the minister?
The department provided feedback seeking clarification on any observations made, so they were qualified in a couple of sense, where they are an observation to state they are, and not to be misinterpreted as a necessary statement of fact rather than one of observation. That was one part of the qualifier. The other qualifier that we sought to be clear on is where the information was coming from, because quite often that was confused in early drafts, where it wasn't clear whether it was actually a stakeholder who were making an observation or a participant talking about their lived experience. And so our suggestions and asks of the University of Adelaide was to make that clearer in the paragraphs of the report so the reader understood some context for the findings and observations being made, so they knew that when they were hearing an observation, they knew whether it was the journey of an individual has come off the card or a stakeholder that either works with participants or what they might have observed in the towns. So that was important that we made that clarification. And Senator, sorry if you indulge me, one last qualifier we sought was to ensure that throughout the body of the report, the University of Adelaide made several mentions of the inability to make any causal links to the removal of the cards and what some of the observations were, and we wanted to make sure that was also included in the executive summary.
So due to rotate now.
So if I can just clear up this point, and then I'm coming back to this. So you would agree, through the information that was received under FOI, it was the department that asked that it be made clear to the researchers that they should emphasise that they could not find a singular causal link between the cessation of the CDC and negative social outcomes. I can provide the quotes, the exact quotes, if you'd like me to table them.
Senator, the officer did not say that. What he said...
I'm telling you what's in the report. I'm telling you what was in not the report, I'm telling you what was in the material that was obtained under FOI.
Senator, the department did not edit the document. The department sought clarifications to make sure that it had good readability and that it actually, as Mr Burford said, that it was really clear who was saying what, when they were saying it, was it an observation from a stakeholder, was it a lived experience journey, and to make sure that that was clear so that the report could be looked at in balance. The department didn't edit the report and the department didn't direct what the report said.
So you're saying to me that there wasn't a request for clearer evidence of no impacts made to the University of Adelaide?
No, Senator. What we said was where you have made findings in the report, they should be represented in the executive summary, and that is a very common practice for any report by anyone. to say these are the major findings in the report, scoop them up and stick them in an executive summary, and then make sure that they are referenced within the report appropriately. And I think that's what Mr Burford has said.
Well, I'm sure the Minister's interested to know about this because it comes from South Australia, but in South Australia there was nothing in terms of data about child protection matters that had increased, emergency hospital presentations, increases in alcohol consumption, increases in the number of people who had actually were going through rehab. There was not a single voice in that entire report that heard from the child. Not a single voice of a child. Not a single bit of data that talked about alcohol, gambling in that area, or even school attendance in the surrounding areas. How can you possibly sit there and say what you're saying today when not even the data that related to the whole reason that that card existed was actually examined in that report in South Australia?
So, Senator, if I can help, the reason the report was done, it was not a causational evaluation. That is not what was commissioned. And the report makes that very clear. It was the experience of people on the ground from their worldview. So it was not a causational evaluation. We made that was part of the purpose and the focus of the report, was to actually have lived experience on the ground from stakeholders and participants who had come off the card about their experience of that process. And I think that's a really important qualifier, because what you're suggesting, and I understand what you're suggesting, is that it should have had causational data, but that wasn't the intent of the report.
Western Australia provided it. Western Australia provided it.
We entered an MOU with Western Australian Government to share a more detailed data. South Australian Government would not release that level of data, and so we didn't have access to emergency data. We were limited to publicly available data, and that limited what the university could analyse in terms of comparative analysis. The Western Australian Government agreed with some fine-tuned data that relates to some more detail in the crime statistics and also EDAs, Emergency Department Admissions. I do want to read from page 17 of the report, and this was in the very earliest drafts. The University of Adelaide qualifies the data for both EDAs, Emergency Department Admissions, and the police was found to be very volatile on a monthly basis. For example, in police data, in more than one case, there was a fourfold increase in offensive in 1 month, followed by an equal fall the next month. One outcome is the mean values across several months may be subject to unusual and arbitrary variations. Consequently, is it possible that any observed association present from community-level data relating to both EDAs and the police was not causal but subject to missing variable bias, and hence much of the apparent association is spurious?
But there's not even information from the police in South Australia.
Senator Little, I am due to rotate the call, now overdue to rotate the call. So I'll pass to Senator Waters, and then I'm coming straight back to you, Senator Little, to see us through. So Senator Waters, if we could keep this to 10 minutes, please.
Yes, thanks very much. That should be all I need. Can we just go back to the new 5-year agreement that you mentioned, the new 5-year National Partnership Agreement? I'm sorry, I've only just found the minutes of the National Cabinet. I'm just after a little more detail on what that is.
So, Senator, can I just confirm what you mean by more detail? What are you...
Is it the document that's replacing the current National Partnership Agreement that is how the funding under the National Plan is given to states and territories?
For the frontline services,
yes.
That's correct.
Okay. So is it, was the last one 5 years?
The last one was 4 years,
okay,
the current one, but there's...
It came in as a COVID.
It came in through COVID, so there's different iterations. So there's 2021, 23, 23, 20... I have to just check my...
Okay.
So there were different iterations of that first frontline service schedule.
Okay. And they're all expiring now?
They're all... they expire at the end of each financial year.
Okay,
so let me just find that. And then this is a new June next year, 2025.
Okay.
So the new agreement will start from July 25 and go for 5 years.
5 years, right. Thank you very much. And is there any change in scope anticipated? The broad parameters of the scope are outlined in the 6th of September National Cabinet. Which I'm trying to find. Can you give me the Cliff Notes?
It is, so I do have it here.
Just after any differences from the existing agreement?
From the existing agreement?
Either in coverage or in amounts or...
So the National Cabinet communique specified coverage, including services such as men's behaviour. It also specified that it would provide more flexibility though, so states can determine where the great areas of greatest need would be across those priorities listed.
Yes, okay, thank you. That is ringing bells.
The three specifics were specialist services for women, services to support children exposed to family domestic sexual violence to heal and recover. That's the piece you were talking about earlier. And working with men, including men's behaviour change programs for perpetrators of gendered violence.
Thank you. That's ringing bells now. Appreciate that. If there's any more detail beyond those fairly general media statements that I recall now I have read, could you give me what you can? Thank you very much. In particular, it's the transparency piece that I'm concerned about, because there's critique of obviously the previous funding agreements. It's just very hard to track what goes where, and I'm sure that frustrates everyone. So that's a bit I'm particularly interested in. Thank you. Just on the Anne Rose family domestic sexual violence perpetration study, I asked in last estimates about this, and you kindly told me that there was to be a 6-week rapid scan to identify perpetration intervention points and program effectiveness. So I'm interested in where's that 6-week rapid scan at? Have we finished that now? And what did it find? And what comes next?
Yes, Senator, thank you. The rapid review was finished. It was an input. The rapid scan was finished. It was an input to the rapid review. Apologies. I don't have any more update on that, that it was an important input to the rapid review report.
Okay. Is it public, the rapid scan?
No.
Oh, why not?
It's not public at this point. That would be a decision for government about whether that would be public.
Okay. Minister, can I ask that you take that one under advisement as well, just whether or not this particular document, the rapid scan of perpetration and intervention points, which fed into the rapid review, whether that rapid scan piece can be made public?
Of course.
Yeah, thank you. And so Anne Rose undertook that. On notice, could you just let me know how much they were allocated to do that work? And yeah, just obviously it should be made public if they were given public money to do the work, I would think. What comes next in that perpetration study? Was it always only ever a 6-week rapid scan, or is there some other components now?
No, Senator, there were 2 components to their work, the rapid scan, and then they have allocated additional funding to undertake more research projects for perpetration in and out for those that use violence and the perpetration of that. So there's a range of projects that were already underway. You may remember at last estimates under their national research framework that there were already a set of projects and they've added to it. And those are, they've added an initial group, and we're just in the process of working through what's next.
Okay, so they've added an initial group. What's that bit about?
I'll ask Mr Crozier to come forward and we can run through what those were.
Yeah, thank you.
It's obviously there's still other work underway, and we can put on notice what that looks like further to the list that they've got.
Yeah,
but
thank
they added
you.
Additional activities.
Yes, if you could just tell me about the new bits that won't already be publicly attainable.
So Tim Crozier, Branch Manager, National Policy. There were 6 projects, additional 6 projects added. There was a media release on the 22nd of July on the NRA's website that announced those additional 6.
Okay,
They're in addition
great.
to the 8 that were announced on the 13th of June.
Thank you. I will look them up. Is that it? So the 8 plus the 6, any other research projects coming, or that will be the totality? Okay, thanks. I'll go check on that detail. Now, I have some questions here from a young person who's a survivor of family violence, and they would like to know what priority is being given to children and young people under the National Partnership Agreement funding. So presumably they mean both the existing agreement and potentially this new 5-year agreement.
Senator, so there's the National Partnership Agreement, and then, of course, we have other initiatives under the National Plan.
Yes.
The National
I presume they know what they're talking about when they say National Partnership Agreement,
yes,
so let's go with that.
We would need to, I think, take it on notice because the states allocate with, of course, they do project plans and agree that with us, but we wouldn't have that detail here with us now about which states have got specific projects funded to support children and young people through the current National Partnership Agreement. And it would be a matter of going through the project planning process with them for the new one, so I wouldn't have any advice on that at this point.
Well, thank you. If you can take the project plans under the existing agreement on notice. Those project plans, are they a public document?
No. They are referenced in the schedule as a requirement. Yes. They're not public documents.
Okay. Can I get them anyway? Is there any way that, they can be seen by committee members? They're obviously very crucial to work out what money's going where.
We do publish end of agreement progress reports. So we're coming up to the next one of those. So those will be publicly available. I would need to take on notice there's details in those project plans that might go to things like active procurements and the like. So we can't share, they're difficult in terms of the detail in them, and we would need to confirm whether we are able to provide details of project plans.
Well, thank you for checking on that. But if you can't give me those, I am interested in the end of agreement progress reports. Is that on a website somewhere?
We can provide on notice where they are and when the next one's coming up.
Okay, yes, please. Thanks very much.
Senator, I'm just about to go.
Oh, great. I've got 2 more questions and then I'm done. Thank you. The next question this young person has was, how does the National Partnership Agreement's current lack of focus on children and young people align with the National Plan's commitment to seeing and servicing children as victims in their own right?
Can you just repeat the first part of that?
How does the National Partnership Agreement's current lack of focus on children and young people align with the National Plan's commitment to seeing and servicing children as victims in their own right?
The National Plan's agreed to by all governments, so those principles of looking at children and young people in their own rights part of the policy framework.
I guess the same way, isn't that reflected in the agreement?
Well, again, I can't confirm tonight. We'd need to check what states are actually doing, Senator, so I just don't know that I feel I've got the detail tonight to confirm that.
Well, look, thank you, because you've already taken that aspect on notice, so yes, please. And lastly, how does the National Partnership Agreement's lack of focus on children and young people align with the recommendations of the Rapid Review report?
Again, I think that we'd take that on notice alongside, we don't have the detail here to confirm what's currently happening around children and young people.
Thanks, Senator. Thanks very much for your help.
Sorry, Senator. Sorry, Senator. There are other programs that the department runs that support children in a range of different ways, and I'm happy to either have the officer come to the table to talk through them or take it on notice and table it for you so you can see what that looks like in terms of counselling, support services and a raft of other things.
This person knows an awful lot about the organs of government in this area.
What a wonderful thing. But yes, certainly happy to take that on notice for you and provide that to you so you can help.
Thank you, Ms Hope.
Thanks, Chair.
I need to return the call to Senator Little, and you can take us through to the end. So thank you.
I'm just going back to the experience of residents in the far north of South Australia or far west of South Australia. There are now 21...
Whereabouts did you say in South Australia?
In the far west, Ceduna and surrounds. Yalata, Ceduna, Streaky, all of those. I'm interested in understanding, if you can confirm, are there 21 support services that have been established in Ceduna and surrounds to respond to the impact of the removal of the cashless debit card?
No, I don't think so.
That sounds like a combined number, Senator, but I'll get the officer to talk through what the department's done.
Senator, I'm just looking up the actual details of how many agreements there are at the moment. I might ask Ms Vanderson to come and give me some assistance here. The funding in the communities just are in a few batches as well. We have existing support services that we've continued. We have local support officers that help communities liaise with Services Australia. We also have what's called a fund for local supports. That's a brokerage model that allocates some money for a backbone organisation to seek funding proposals that will they'll consider and put forward to us for priority investment. There's also a community-led solutions for economic development, of which
do you have a list?
I do. Yes, I can.
Can you just table that list?
They're not new.
So
we haven't set up 21 new.
No, they're not. They're not all brand new. They're existing services that we've continued. Some are new, but we can certainly provide that detailed
provide
list.
the list of services that respond in Ceduna to people who were previously on income management, or I think there's 14, or has that number even reduced further?
So just to be clear, Senator, so we can get you the right information, you are referring to services that have been specifically set up as part of the removal of the cashless debit card. Is that correct?
That's right.
As the local support. Yeah. Yes, that's Senator. We can. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay. So that's for a catchment of. Can you also confirm? Ceduna has a population of around 3,000 people. Are you able to provide information on the numbers of people that are actually accessing those services? Because most people in that area actually work. So we're not actually talking about 3,000 people who are needing to access those services. Can you provide me with information on how many people are actually accessing those services?
Yeah, we'll take that on notice, Senator, but I will note some of those services are designed and implemented to be a direct to an individual. Others are more of a whole of community type service as well. And so we can make that distinction in what we provide on notice as well. And also it'd probably be important to confirm the total populations we're talking about, because with Ceduna proper, probably closer to 2,500, but you may have more recent data than me, but once you account for the 5 surrounding communities, it gets up to... Yeah, that's right. And they'll come in and out. In fact, some of the services is around some bus services as well. Would we have any more detail? I think that's something we best confirm on notice. Yep.
Right. So you mentioned before about the number of people you were consulting in relation to the cessation of income management. Have you done any... we know the financial impact. Well, that's not really clear. But are you completing any social impact assessments in relation to any decision? I know you said you've got people telling you it's a great idea, potentially. Hopefully you've got some people brave enough to say it's a terrible idea. But are you completing social impact assessments that will inform a decision to continue down that path of the removal of income?
We're currently synthesising all the information from those consultations coming in, and you are right, Senator, there is a range of views in terms of people who believe that income management has some benefit, others don't believe it's for them and they'd like to come off it. Other people would have views that they don't think someone else should be selling them, they should be on it. And so those range of views also bring to bear what people think the benefits are to that, and also some of the risks of not having it as well. So we are synthesising that information, and that'll go into forming advice to government.
Feeling good about it and getting some feedback is different from actually doing a social impact assessment about what is going to happen to children, to adults, to the community, to businesses in those areas that will be impacted by the removal of income management. Is there a plan to do a social impact assessment before that decision is made? Because none was done, as I understand it, before the alcohol restrictions were lifted in the Northern Territory and then reinstated because it was such a disaster. And I've only been here a couple of years, but I don't think there was any impact assessments done with the removal of the cashless debit card either.
The part of the consultations is quite explicitly gathering information about what sort of supports people, individuals and communities will require and desire with the moving to a voluntary model, including the amount of time needed to take and how much care needs to be taken. Over half of the people in income management have been on it for over 10 years. It's a very different proposition to the cashless debit card with regard to how long someone's been on it. In fact, there'll be plenty of people in the Northern Territory under the age of 35 who have been on an income support that may not have ever been off income management. So in terms of our assessment of the needs and the preparations, it's very much around what that careful transition will look like.
You still haven't answered my question. Is there any plan to do any social impact assessments before progressing towards a decision to remove income management? What you're telling me is what you're hearing from the consultations. And I don't know who you're talking to, whether it's people on the card, whether it's stakeholders, how comprehensive. You've just said you're consulting people.
I stepped through the phases actually, Senator, and I can provide a full list of who we've spoken to, which communities we've spoken to and the quantum of people we've spoken to. That includes people that have direct service delivery experience with the people in those communities, and also those community leadership that have very strong views about how this would need to be managed. And that analysis will help inform advice to government not only about what the transition would need to look like to move to a voluntary model, but also the supports that need to go around. Now, those supports would have to give consideration of what the impacts would be for individuals in terms of as they make that transition to voluntary.
So what I've taken from this conversation is there is no social impact assessment and there is no plan for a social impact assessment. Despite spending hundreds of millions of dollars on fixing the mess in those communities that the removal of that card has left behind for children, for older people, for the most vulnerable, for businesses, you do realise that the businesses in Ceduna wrote to the minister, nearly every single business in Ceduna. That wasn't included in the report that was done by the Adelaide University. Why was that? They would have had it.
I could provide data. I think we have data on the stakeholders in the Ceduna region that were actually consulted in the University of Adelaide work. We've also had the Mayor in Ceduna quoted in the local media regarding the number of visitors that aren't from Ceduna or the 5 communities that do come in. There's no clarity around who in the community at any one point in time would have been on the cashless debit card and who wouldn't have been as well. So we have heard the voices of those stakeholders, and that's also helped inform what the actual support services that have gone in there as well. We've been workshopping with those communities. We still have $40 million to deploy for further support spread across the actual cashless debit card regions, and that's been worked out with those communities and those community organisations.
But despite the money that is being poured into Central Australia and into Ceduna and the other sites, the corresponding data that would show that there's been an improvement in community safety just isn't there. So how on earth can a department whose most of their work is about supporting vulnerable people then continue on this path of essentially removing a program that enables the most vulnerable to actually have some safety, to reduce the risk of becoming unsafe? You know, you talk about the Northern Territory. The Human Rights Commissioner interviewed 150 children. Most of those were from the Northern Territory. I don't know whether you've had a chance to read every single page and every single quote from a child that was interviewed, because if you did, and if this government did, they wouldn't be removing income management. Those children deserve a voice. They were honest about what was happening to them. So how do you protect those children? Putting money into a playground in Alice Springs is not the answer, because those children that need protection aren't at school, and nor are they in that playground, and nor are they welcome to be in that playground. I just don't understand, and surely, Minister, with all of this evidence, I just don't understand how it's possible when you hear the voices of children, and we spent all last year talking about voices, the Human Rights Commissioner has given voice to those children. And they talk about safety, they talk about alcohol, they talk about violence in their homes.
Senator,
and you know that what you're going to do is make it worse for them.
You have posed questions within that. We're due to close. I'll give officials or the Minister, whoever would like to, an opportunity to respond to that, and then I'll move to make closing remarks.
I'll just make this observation. My recollection is that you opposed the voice, Senator.
Are you
if
serious?
There is a response on the question put by Senator Little, we'll hear it. No, okay, all right. Given we are at the conclusion of the evening, before we do, I did just want to say some nice things about Mr. Griggs. So,
thank you, officials.
Mr. Griggs, this is your last estimates before this committee after your significant announcement on the end of an extraordinary career in support of social policy and many other policy outcomes and initiatives in Australia. You've been part of some of the most significant policy reforms and had some of the most significant responsibilities a public servant can have in our country. And on behalf of this committee, I want to thank you for your service to our country and especially your service to our committee, your attendance and participation in all of our processes and the leadership you've shown in this committee, and particularly want to note just how supportive you have been of your staff and officers throughout those processes. So on behalf of all of us, I do extend our thanks and gratitude to you and wish you all the very best with what might come next.
Thanks, Chair. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. On that note, that does conclude today's hearing, and I wish to thank all witnesses who appeared and Hansard Broadcasting and our Secretariat for their assistance. I remind all senators that the committee has agreed that any written questions or notice should be lodged with the Secretariat by Thursday, 14th of November 2024, and the answers to questions on notice are due by Thursday, the 19th of December 2024. The committee stands adjourned.